time to start the meeting, so let's get going. Will you join me in the salute to the flag, please? Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And will the secretary call the roll, please?
Chair Machin,
Here.
Vice Chair Ebley,
Here.
Commissioner Durr,
Here.
Commissioner Jones, Commissioner Liang, Commissioner Lopez, Commissioner Quill, Commissioner Liang is absent. We have quorum.
Real quick, Chair, before we move on, I would like to point out that Commissioner Earp has actually resigned. He had work conflicts, so he turned in his resignation notice to the council member, Mulvihill, that appointed him. So we found out after the agenda was posted, so that's why he appears as a commissioner, but he technically is no longer a commissioner. Just want to clarify that.
Yeah. So would you administer the oath, please?
Those wishing to speak, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you are about to give before this body will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do. Thank you. You may be seated.
Do we have a consent agenda?
Yes, Chair, we do. We have one item on the consent calendar. While the agenda says the minutes for August 8th, they are actually the minutes for August 9th, or I'm sorry, January 9th. Got a little bit of a cold today.
Okay.
So it's not January 8th. It should be January 9th, 2018, and staff is recommending approval of those minutes.
Is there any discussion on that? Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion and a second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The motion carries. Consent agenda, were you going to, okay, was that all on the consent agenda? Okay.
Correct.
Consent items are considered routine in nature and may be enacted in one motion. All public and non-public hearings will be open at one time. Any item may be discussed separately upon request of a member of the Planning Commission or member of the public. Does staff have any updates?
It's just the minutes for January 9th.
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak on any of the consent calendar items? If not, I entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar. Didn't we just do that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's already been done.
I think I've got
Yeah.
out of phase there. On public hearing items, the Planning Commission will first hear a report from staff, and then the public hearing will be opened. The applicant will have an opportunity to speak. Next, members of the public will be allowed to speak. Anyone in the audience wishing to speak must be sworn in and also fill out a request to speak form. The forms are located on the table near the door. When your name is called, come forward and speak into the microphone, say and spell your name, and give your address for the taped record. After all have spoken, the applicant will be allowed to respond. The public hearing will then be closed, and the Planning Commission will begin deliberations and make a decision. All actions except general plan amendments and amendments to the Municipal Development Code are final action unless an appeal is filed and fee paid within 15 days to the Community Development Department. If you challenge the resulting action of the Planning Commission in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing described in this agenda or in written correspondence delivered to the Community Development Department at or prior to the public hearing. The next item on the agenda is Development Code Amendment 1802A, 1802B, and 1803C. A request to establish regulations related to commercial cannabis land use and activities, personal cultivation and public smoking, and cannabis events. May we have the staff report, please?
Yes, Chair, I'll be giving the staff report this evening. As you've noted, there are three separate code amendments before the Planning Commission this evening. The first deals with commercial cannabis activities. The second is smoking of cannabis in public places. And the third item is personal cultivation. You will notice that the three chapters that are being suggested to be added to the municipal code are actually not in Title 19. So the Commission's mission this evening is actually fairly focused, and I'll get into that specifically what that is. We have, working with the council has held a series of workshops, publicly noticed meetings on this. So commercial cannabis activity will be added to Chapter 5, which is business license and regulations. And then Chapter 8 deals with public rights of way, which is where public smoking would smoking in public would occur: the street, the sidewalk, building entrance. Personal cultivation would also be proposed to be added to Chapter 8. There's quite a lengthy background, but I think it's helpful. I know the Commission hasn't been involved in this to the degree that the Council has been, so I'd like to take some time to go through the background. I think most people are aware that in November of 2016, there were actually two measures which passed. One was Proposition 64, which was a statewide ballot measure which made adult use of marijuana for people 21 and older legal. Once the state actually developed its guidelines, which actually they were supposed to have permanent guidelines in effect by January 1st of this year. The state is actually operating under emergency guidelines, and they're still working on finalizing those. But nonetheless, as of January 1st, the State Bureau of Cannabis Control did start issuing permits for businesses that are also licensed at the local level. Also on January 8th, November 8th of 2016 was Measure O, which was a citizen-sponsored initiative which established a regulatory framework for cannabis businesses in the city of San Bernardino. In June of 2017, SB 94 was signed into law, and SB 94 was intended to harmonize. There's been a series of bills and propositions that have been passed over approximately the last 15 years, and SB 94 was intended to consolidate all of those into a single package so that it was easier for local agencies and the state to actually go through the permit process. The City Council appointed a Citizens Advisory Committee in October of 2017. The CAC met for 5 consecutive weeks to go over issues which were actually not covered in Measure O. On December 20th of 2017, the City Council received the report from the CAC, and then at that same hearing, adopted a 45-day moratorium on outdoor personal cultivation, at special events, and anything that wasn't covered under Measure O, because as of December 20th, Measure O was still the law. Since then, we now have a final ruling from the courts, the Superior Courts. Stephen downloaded a copy on Monday, so we do have the final written decision. So we now know that Measure O has been declared invalid, at least by the County Superior Court. The court hearing was on December 28th. There were actually 4 separate lawsuits that were filed over Measure O, and again, all of those have now been dispensed with. On January 22nd, the City Council at a public hearing took public comments anticipating that Measure O would be invalidated. The City Council started to craft regulations. Stephen Graham, myself, and our consultant, Matt Eaton, who's here this evening from HDL Consultants, have worked on this to put together a package of regulations that are before the Planning Commission this evening. On February 1st, the City Council held a public hearing and they extended the moratorium for 10 months, up to 10 months and 15 days, but they also gave very clear direction to staff to get this regulations put in place as quickly as possible. On February 7th, the City Council received a report on the cannabis regulations, and it very specifically lays out commercial cannabis activities are anything which is not done inside your house. Personal cultivation up to 6 plants is permissible under state law. It's the commercial cannabis activities, the dispensaries, cultivation, the testing, the delivery. Those are areas where cities can develop their own sets of regulation. And that's what we've been doing. Also on February 7th, the City Council directed the Planning Commission look at 2 specific areas, and I'll go into those now briefly. Again, Development Code Amendment 1802A deals with commercial activity. I'm sure you've all had a chance to read through the draft ordinance. There are sensitive use buffers in there. I haven't called them all out here on the slide, but the key question the council had for the Planning Commission, the draft ordinance has a 300-foot radius around residential uses between a residential use and a commercial cannabis activity. The question that the council wants the commission to weigh in on is that sensitive use buffer, should that be increased from 300 feet to 600 feet? So that's the first question before the commission. And I don't know, Chair, if you want me to go through all of these or you want to take them one at a time. I'm happy to answer questions. Again, I don't know from a process standpoint what the easiest would be. Although actually now as I'm talking, maybe, because I think the speakers may want to talk about a variety of things, so maybe I can go through the presentation, focus on the 2 issues for the commission, answer questions, and then we can take public comment if you're agreeable to that.
Any comments? Apparently, we agree to that.
Okay, thank you. 1802B, again, is smoking cannabis in public places. Again, because this deals with public rights-of-way, there aren't really any specific questions for the Planning Commission. There is a distance, a 50-foot distance that's required for anybody who's smoking to be away from the entrance to a building, a window, a air conditioning intake duct, so that people inside the building are protected to the maximum degree possible. And then 1802C is personal cultivation. Again, under state law, individuals are able to cultivate up to 6 plants for their own personal use in their private residence. Indoor cultivation is the only thing that this ordinance would allow. Outdoor cultivation is specifically prohibited. And the question that the council wanted the Planning Commission to weigh in on was whether or not a permit should be required. The draft ordinance doesn't currently have a permit requirement. And the reason for that is the state law is fairly explicit, and the draft ordinance talks about protecting children from, minors from who don't have a medical use for marijuana, that they are prohibited from accessing the product in the house. And this is something that the CAC and the City Council talked rather extensively about. Again, the question is whether or not a permit would be issued in order to do this, or would it be self-executing, and then if there were a violation, it's very clear that anybody who violates the personal cultivation standards could be cited by the police department or by code enforcement. So those are kind of the two key questions before the commission this evening. There are some fairly detailed CEQA findings under the personal cultivation, because the permit that's being issued, the cannabis permit, is not a land use action. There is no CEQA finding. The CEQA finding is required prior to any building permits or administrative permits being issued. So if somebody needs to build a new building, say they're doing cultivation, it's at that point that the CEQA review would occur. Or if they're doing tenant improvements for an existing building, that's when the CEQA determination would be made. And staff is recommending that the Planning Commission recommend approval of all 3 code amendments to the Mayor and City Council. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
I do have a question. Good. I was a member of the Cannabis Committee, and we spent lengthy hours talking about the personal growing of cannabis. And I recall in that meeting that the results of that, we did recommend outdoor growing, and that met the Los Angeles County Code and the state code. And we also recommended that a building permit wasn't required, and primarily a building permit would cause somebody to list their name in public records, and we felt as though a building permit would open the door for people that might want to break into homes or to cause harm to people that were growing marijuana. So those were the recommendations from the committee, if I recall.
That is correct. They were, yes.
Yeah, and I noticed that all that has been changed. So I guess the council changed that?
The council's talked about this quite a bit. I wouldn't say that the council changed everything. The biggest change, as you've noted, is outdoor personal cultivation is now prohibited. Okay. The draft ordinance that was presented to the council had, there was no requirement for a permit, but that was a specific question that the council asked the Planning Commission to weigh in on. So that certainly can be discussed. And I know Stephen was at all of the CAC meetings as well, so he may have some comment.
Yeah, we've all got to enjoy each other's company over the last couple of months on this topic. I did want to address the outdoor personal cultivation just for a second. I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to say that outdoor cultivation is prohibited. Outdoor cultivation, as we've defined it, which is, I would refer to it as open air cultivation, is prohibited. Cultivation outside of your residential structure is permitted in a greenhouse or other type of structure for the growing of plants. And the primary concern that the council seemed to have there was odor control and visibility. So, I know that the CAC did have concerns about, restricting, about very similar concerns about ensuring the safety of the plants, making sure that they weren't being stolen, and basically being good neighbors to your neighbors around you who may not appreciate the odor. And that seemed like a good compromise between allowing outdoor or open air cultivation and giving people some flexibility beyond just growing it inside the residential dwelling. So that was a distinction. So when we say outdoor cultivation is prohibited, it's specifically defined in the ordinance, and it may not have the same meaning other places. I did just want to touch back on the Measure O cases. Mark was quite right. We did receive the final statement of decision from the Superior Court judge who heard the case. His final decision is that Measure O is invalid. That decision has not yet gone into effect. We do have to wait for a final judgment to be approved by the court. So we're almost there, not quite. Measure O is still the law, but its days are numbered. That was just the two comments I had.
Thank you.
Chair, I did have one other note here, sorry. I did just want for the audio record to reflect that Commissioner Liang had arrived at 6:06 prior to the start of the staff report.
Thank you. On the question of distance from residential uses, what do you think about that? I think it's now 300 feet.
That is correct. The draft ordinance that the council considered was 300 feet.
I have a comment. Okay, Chair. Sure. I do believe that it should be changed to 600 feet. 300 feet is not adequate space, especially some of these neighborhoods that have industrial buildings directly across the street or zoned light industrial. This is the place that I believe they're going to try to occupy, because many of them are vacant, especially in the third ward. And I think 600 feet would be a much better distance than 300 feet. 300 feet, that's not very far. And we do require, I believe it's 500 feet for alcohol, for a conditional use permit. Any place that sells alcohol, is it 500 feet?
I would have to ask one of the code experts. I unfortunately don't have that information at my fingertips.
Okay. But I recommend that it be moved to 600, not 300.
Well, I might suggest, Chair, before there's actually a motion, I believe there are some public speakers that you should probably hear from the audience first.
Okay. Through the chair, I would like to, if we do go to 600 feet or even at 300 feet, I would like us to take in consideration natural barriers such as the freeway, flood control, railroad access, things of that nature. I'm looking at this whole thing as pro-business, and I think that if we put too many barriers out there, that it will affect the business. So when you have if you go 600 feet and you have a natural barrier like a freeway or flood control, I think that should be substantial in that distance, because it is a barrier that we're dealing with. So if you go 600 feet, we're really limiting the access to business in our community. So I'd like to include some of those natural or the freeways and things of that nature as roadblocks or cut off.
Mr. Liang.
Yeah, thank you. Question. So, in terms of the distance, is that measured from property line to property line, or is it the structure themselves?
It is property line to property line, and it includes both residentially zoned property, residentially used property, so non-conforming uses, as well as residential and adjacent cities. We're really trying to be a good neighbor to our surrounding communities, so it does include all of those provisions. But to answer your question, Commissioner, it is property line to property line, yes.
Thank you. And in terms of sensitive uses, there's been sort of discussion in the staff report. Would it include parks, things of that nature?
Yes, Commissioner. So the section you'd be looking for is 510-250, which starts on page 24. The first sensitive use is residential zoned or residentially used properties. The second is any school providing K through 12 instruction. commercial daycare centers that are licensed, youth centers, and parks. The city, there's no sensitive use buffer, but the city is to consider the proximity to religious facilities, and the city council also included libraries when imposing the conditions on the discretionary permit or when determining whether to approve it at all.
Thank you.
I have a question. Has there been any comparative analysis to what other cities have adopted as far as what would be an appropriate buffer?
We have surveyed other cities. It is really difficult to, there is no standard, I guess is the best way to put it. Some cities have prohibited commercial cannabis activities outright. Other cities have been much more permissive. So I don't think, at least from my perspective, I can say that, you know, the standard among communities is 300 feet, 500, or 600 feet. I think each community is really looking at their unique characteristics and what the community concerns are.
And Commissioner, also to that point, you know, one of the things that staff and HDL, you know, did look at was we did look at the initiatives that received signatures in our city and the voters in the city voted on. Measure O, while it is invalid because of severe issues with its structure, did fundamentally try to keep marijuana away from the residential zones of the city. That was encapsulated in its purpose and intent sections. It was the core of the arguments that were submitted to the voters in favor of it. And so I think that that was something that staff tried to keep in mind, that while it is invalid, it certainly received a significant number of votes in the city.
Was there a specific reference to an appropriate buffer size in the Measure O policy that you possibly could share with us?
It is 600 feet.
Yes, Measure O did 600 feet from residential zones. It did not include a buffer from residentially used property.
Nor did it include buffers from residential uses in adjacent communities. So this ordinance does try to protect adjacent communities as well as protecting the residents of San Bernardino.
So this ordinance is actually, the buffer is less than what the voters actually approved, technically?
Well, while it's, yes, Measure O had 600 feet from residential uses. I'm sorry, from residentially zoned property. But it did not cast as wide a net in terms of uses and then what is in adjacent communities. So kind of the trade-off in the draft that was presented to the council was to broaden that to include non-conforming uses and the neighboring communities, and lower that radius, that buffer, to 300 feet. So that's really the question before the commission. Do you want to increase that back to 600?
The police department review that was conducted, did they feel that the 300-foot buffer would impact the quality of life of residents, or would it need to be increased, or would it impact their staffing or drain any of the city's resources by keeping it at 300, and would increasing it help their efforts? Or?
Well, I think the police department they're very much involved in establishing the fee, because the regulatory fee is actually going to have an enforcement component to it as well. So that's really what the police department's focus has been on. They really did not weigh in on the 300 versus 600, because in addition to the buffer, there's a cap on the overall number of cannabis permits that can be issued. It's one permit per 12,500 residents. So that establishes the maximum number of permits that could be issued. The question now is, where can those businesses locate 300 or 600 feet from residential?
If I may follow up on the term non-conforming, I believe you used non-conforming uses. Mr. Persico?
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Seeking clarification on the term non-conforming uses. Can you define that?
It actually doesn't, I don't think, say non-conforming. I believe Section 250
Or
just
maybe
says
structures?
residential uses. A residentially zoned property, in other words, if you're residential high, residential low, that's a zoning designation, but particularly in some of our industrial areas down in the 3rd Ward, we have a number of older residential properties that are still occupied by residents and households, and they've been living in those households for a number of years. We felt it was appropriate to buffer those properties as well. So there isn't a reference to nonconformity, it's just what is the use of this structure?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I am in agreement with Commissioner Ebley about the 600 feet, and I think I do recall that ABC requires for alcohol outlets 500 feet. And I can understand the pro-business, it makes common sense, if there are natural barriers, but as far as business is concerned, we have to remember, we have to consider the type of business that we're talking about as well, just like we would consider alcohol outlets and other types of businesses that we don't like to have too close to residential areas. So let's just keep that in mind as well.
To the chair. In addition to the discussion on the distance, is there any interest on distinguishing between distances from residential zones and distances from residential uses? Or would you like to keep them the same?
Chair, which one would be easier for the public to interpret and make things easier as far as for the permitting processes and clarity?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind elaborate on the differences between uses versus zone designation. Yeah.
Sure. I think Mark took a crack at it. I'll try. So every parcel within the city is zoned under the city's development code. There are many different zones. We're trying to consolidate them down to be a little bit simpler. But generally speaking, there's 3 broad categories, and those are residential zones, commercial zones, and industrial zones. Areas along the north part of the city, which are primarily residential in character, would be the type of area that are zoned residential. Whereas we have other parts of the city, along the main thoroughfares where you have businesses, those are generally zoned commercial. And then you have other parts of the city, generally around the southern part, around the airport, that are zoned industrial, and that's where we generally have the large buildings. A property can be zoned for one use but used for another. That's generally known as non-conforming. That's not used in this section. But the specific issue that comes into play here is, especially in the southern part of the city, which was previously county, unincorporated county, we have areas of the city that are zoned industrial light and have been slowly over time converting, but they are previously occupied as residences, generally have pretty large lots, older houses. Those are being used for residential purposes, even though the zoning that the city has applied to that area is industrial. Like I said, it's slowly converting to industrial uses, and that's essentially the intent of zoning laws. But this locational restriction, as it's currently written, and is before the Planning Commission to consider, doesn't distinguish between property that is zoned residential and property that is used residential. The idea is to protect both equally. And so that was sort of the question, and it's not something you have to answer right now. Obviously, you also may want to talk amongst yourselves and get input from the public, but the question was, do you want to distinguish between property that is actually been zoned by the city for residential purposes and property that may have been zoned for industrial, and that's what the City Council and the Planning Commission have determined is the appropriate zoning, but is still currently being used for residential.
Was that discussed at the CAC level?
It was not. So the CAC's charge was actually marijuana, we're all calling it cannabis now, cannabis issues outside of those that are regulated by Measure O. Measure O regulated all commercial cannabis activities within the city. So their primary areas of discussion were personal cultivation in residential zones, public consumption and smoking of cannabis, taxes and fees, and then special events, primarily at the state fairgrounds in the city, the Orange Show. So that was their primary topics of concern. While they were talking about fees and other issues, they did have some discussion about these because it's kind of hard not to talk about cannabis dispensaries when you're talking about cannabis. But that was not their primary direction from the city council.
Mr. Graham, you mentioned the Orange Show. Is that a sanctioned state facility, state fairgrounds?
It is a designated state fair under the Business and Professions Code. They are not they are not an arm of the state. They're a nonprofit that receives money from the state to have a citrus fair. And so you'll actually notice that if you turn to one of the first sections, I think it's 030.
Yeah, that's the reason I'm asking the question.
Yeah, sorry, 060C. In addition to all of the requirements contained in this ordinance for marijuana or for commercial cannabis activities, any state-designated fair, as defined in the Business and Professions Code, which would include the Orange Show, is not authorized to have any cannabis special events unless they obtain a development agreement, with the city of San Bernardino. So that would be something that would come before the Planning Commission, and you would talk about how many events they're going to have, how many people they can have, what other sort of operating restrictions are necessary, and then that would be passed along for approval by the City Council. So the Orange Show is covered by this ordinance.
Okay. Thank you.
Whether we would want self-certification or permit fees.
That is correct, yes,
Yep.
for personal cultivation.
Yeah. And I would like to hear your comments on that. Would you, Mr. Persico, define self-certification?
Well, that's the word that I used, although maybe that's not the best word. It is maybe self-enforcing. In other words, the way the ordinance is currently written, if you follow the standards, you don't need a permit. If you do not follow the standards and you are a nuisance and your neighbor calls code enforcement and an inspection is conducted and it's determined that you are not following the regulations, then you will be cited. So as Chair Queel pointed out, the CAC did spend quite a bit of time on this issue. I think with personal cultivation, the council did take quite a bit of what the CAC did, but they have made some changes in the draft ordinance, and the question that they're asking is, should a permit be required?
If a permit were to be required, what would it entail as far as from start to finish with the permitting process?
Well, there's two ideas that the council has talked about. One would be just essentially an online registration, where for presumably a nominal fee, you would just register that you are in compliance with the city's municipal code. And then there would be a record that we would have that, the property at 1234 Main Street has personal cultivation. That would be one process. The other process would be where there is actually a permit and an inspection which is done. You would come in, or it could be done online, where you pay a permit fee. It would be, we haven't calculated the price of or the cost of the permit, but there would be actual physical inspection done of the property, where a building inspector would go out and actually inspect the property prior to the homeowner or resident being able to cultivate personally on their property. So those were kind of the two different approaches that the council had talked about.
So as far as this database that they would need to register or apply to in order to get this permit, would those names be submitted to like a public record or be available like upon request? Or would
Every permit that we issue is a public record. So yes, they would be. And that's always the case for permits that are issued by the city. So yes, it is a public record.
So if we had San Bernardino residents that wanted to apply for a permit for medical reasons per se, their records would automatically become available. Well, not automatically available to the public, but the public would be able to access their records and determine if they are applying for this type of permit for this specific use.
That is correct, yes.
Mr. Graham, didn't you state that part of this was, part of the ordinance would be to, if you were growing for personal use, it would have to be in a greenhouse type and a facility. Say I wanted to grow my own personal marijuana, or cannabis, excuse me. Didn't you state that part of the ordinance would be that it would have to be in a greenhouse type of environment?
So the ordinance as it's currently written allows for both.
Mm-hmm.
So Prop 64 says that cities cannot prohibit indoor cultivation, and I'm going to use indoor. It's defined in our ordinance as meaning exclusively artificial light. That's how it grows, right? We cannot prohibit that, but we can reasonably regulate it. We can prohibit outdoor cultivation. So we have not, I would say we have not entirely prohibited cultivation outdoors. It's allowed through the use of mixed light, which is both natural and artificial lighting, in a greenhouse or other similar structure. And open air cultivation is prohibited.
Thank you.
Did you want these resolutions considered one at a time, or can we take them all at the same time?
There is just one resolution covering all three issues, but if the commission wants to recommend whatever the commission recommendation is, that will be carried forward into the resolution. We could say that, for instance, if the commission wanted to go to a 600-foot radius, that would get conveyed to the city council.
Well, I would suggest that we hear from the public before we make any decisions. So I would open it up for public comments. And I don't have any speaker slips. Okay.
Did you get the one I turned in earlier today? Yeah, and then I wanted to speak on something not on the agenda. Carmel Row, 325 West 6th Street, San Bernardino, California, 92401. But I haven't been sworn in. Isn't this a public hearing?
All those wishing to speak that just submitted a speaker slip, please stand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you are about to give before this body will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I'm here today because when I read the Planning Commission staff report, it said that any argument I may wish to make in a court of law, I should make here first. So the first question that I would like to touch on is, I'm not actually sure that the city has the authority to pass a marijuana ordinance without taking it to a vote of the people. Accordingly, in November of 2016, Measure O did pass, which is so far invalidated, but there is appeals and there is time. So until final judgment is rendered, which is all of appeals, we're not in a position to really go forward. Secondly, if Measure O is finally a judgment, then Measure N could actually say, hey, we want to step up. And then that would be for the judge to decide. But lastly, the question that I have, and I would kind of hope to get an answer, or at least, be able to state this for the record, is the residents of the city of San Bernardino voted no on Measure P. And Measure P was an ordinance put forth by the city. So before you could take an ordinance, I feel that since you were already voted down, you have put yourself out, and you need to take that ordinance back to a vote of the people. Because when I read this draft ordinance, okay, when I read it and I make notes, I see in there that it says, the same kind of things that the voters disagreed with, where it says that, hey, you could decide you're going to issue all these permits, and then even after you take all the funds, you could decide you're not going to issue permits. Well, that was one of the specific things in Measure P that the people voted against. And so that is a problem, okay? And being that there's a lot of other things in here, I mean, this is a very restrictive ordinance, and I understand, you being from the neighborhood association and you being from the city and you loving the city. I understand that you would be concerned with marijuana in your neighborhood and around your children and around your schools. And I'm sorry that the city for far too many years has allowed marijuana to look bad in your eyes, but the real true image of marijuana is not the guy on the street corner behind the tree, or it is not the gangster on the street corner. It is actually people who are legit, trying to be legit businessmen. Now, I know that is not true all the way in the city. I mean, I would be crazy to believe that, but that is a lack on the city's part, because there are people that, hey, I'm a college graduate, I'm a business owner. I mean, I will run a marijuana dispensary, okay? So there are responsible individuals in this city that have grown up here in this city, that love this city and would like to give back to this city. So before you go and you overregulate, because when I read this, the overregulation of this is, first of all, when you regulate, let's just say I have a residential structure right there on Mount Vernon, and it's commercial. Well, it's in a non-conforming use, so you're telling me that I can't have my commercial business on Mount Vernon because there's a non-conforming residential use next to me? No, that's not acceptable to me. That, if you're going to prohibit it from residential use, which I really don't think anybody has any power to do this, which I'm bringing that up so that if I need to take it to the court, I can tell the court that I brought it up because of the various reasons. But the questions that you were asked today, if you're going to be discussing them, you should allow marijuana dispensaries next to non-conforming residential uses, because this would allow people to maybe use Highland Avenue or Baseline or parts of Waterman or Mount Vernon. And you might say, hey, maybe not in my neighborhood, but with all the regulations that are coming down from the state and all the licenses and all the checks and balances, it's not really in your neighborhood. It's really on the commercial part of a neighborhood. And then you have extra security and you have extra lighting. Now, I know what the image of marijuana looks like to a lot of you, okay? I know it. I mean, it looks very bad. But there are people who, although maybe they haven't been operating, maybe there's been a ban in the city, but who have paid their taxes, who have pulled permits, who've obeyed the law. So these people can be good neighbors. And see, I don't know if you guys realize this, but when we annexed the fire department, we gave away all of our property taxes. We gave away all of our property tax dollars. And the city desperately needs some sort of revenue or some sort of industry. So when you consider restricting where you put these places, you should be as less restrictive as long as they're in commercial and industrial zones. I mean, right, if it was a residential and a residential and a residential, right, you can't do that. That's against state law. But if there's a residential next to 5 commercial buildings, why would you let that building be vacant? I mean, this city needs a lot of love. It needs a lot of revitalization. And I understand that maybe not everybody likes marijuana, okay? But it's saving people from committing suicide and opiates. And I was reading the alcohol laws right now that you guys were talking about. Alcohol does, the alcohol division does not prohibit alcohol from being near schools, nor does it prohibit it from residential neighborhoods. And it's on there. You can download it, and I could actually read it. But I just wanted to say that that the city is being very restrictive when the voters passed very, less restrictive ordinances, and the city's ordinance failed by a vote of the people. So how are they really going to enact this? And I feel like they're using you guys to make bad decisions. So I wanted to point that out. I wanted to say that about the non-conforming uses. I wanted to just be able to stand up here and tell you guys that the negative stigma and the image that you guys have about marijuana, I'm going to say I worked in a marijuana dispensary for 3 months. I was so surprised. I saw lawyers. I saw school teachers. I saw principals. I saw scientists. I didn't see one gangster. I was like, holy cow, real people come into the marijuana dispensary. I'm shocked. I mean, I saw actors, actresses. I mean, it was a real culture shock for me. Okay, and so, granted, there are places that you're not going to see that. You're going to see things you don't want to see. Okay, but with the state regulation finally in place, a lot of that is going to be knocked off. So when you think about regulating this, I mean, you got to think about this fairly, because our general plan says that we have to be friendly to industry. And if you guys are the Planning Commission and you're in charge of making sure we're, in compliance with the general plan, then you need to be open to this new business industry. I mean, like in here, they're requiring a commercial cannabis employee work permit, and then it could take up to 90 days, and then this person has to pay. I mean, people in this city need jobs. I'm going to tell you, we need some sort of revenue stream. We might not like it. I do agree with regulation, but I do agree with the free market, and I do agree with why would you prohibit commercial marijuana on Highland Avenue or on Mount Vernon because a residential structure might be behind it with a wall that you're not ever going to bother anybody, or on Mount Vernon when it's all dilapidated and you got a commercial. I just don't see that. Okay, and as far as making people register, there's, I walked the neighborhoods, and I knocked and I campaigned, and there's a lot of people getting mugged and ripped off. And I would really, 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 really hate, as a single mother, I mean, I couldn't grow 6 plants if I tried. I'd kill them all. I'm just not going to lie. But if I wanted to, I wouldn't want, as a single mother that doesn't own a gun, to have my information on public record where me and my children live. Because somebody who couldn't grow 6 plants might want to take my 6 plants because they couldn't go get a job at the marijuana dispensary because it took 90 days and they really needed a job when we have this new industry coming to our city. So, I know some of you, I feel your pain. I am active in the community. I do hang out places. I actually got myself involved in marijuana so I could get up and give testimony, let you guys know the things that do go on and that don't go on. But if you were just to simply just reject all this today, put in your input, but reject the city and just say, hey, we just need some state law. Maybe we could send a message to the council because the Cannabis Committee, they were for free enterprise. There was a lot of people paying attention. The people who showed up last week hadn't been paying attention for all the months and all the years. And there's been people who've been paying attention. And the Cannabis Commission, they did an excellent job. They heard public input. They put it out there. They got this. They got that. And back to this, when I read this, it seems more like you're setting it up for like Walmart to take over, and you forgot about the local resident, the guy, the mom and pop, the entrepreneur who would really love and want to give back to his city and would hire people in the neighborhood, because we are lacking these things, and we are lacking jobs. As far as, smoking, I hate cigarette smoke, so, however they ban cigarette smoking is fine if you ban marijuana smoking. The personal cultivation, there are older homes in the city that don't have adequate electrical, so if they were to ban outside, I would think that would be more of a, greenhouse, I would think that would be more of a problem than a solution, because there are older neighborhoods in this city. But I really think that you would find with just a little bit of regulations and just a little bit of maybe open-mindedness, let's just a different stereotype. It's a new wave of people. It's not the people that you would think, I think that maybe we could actually do something, and that when Measure O is declared invalid, or Measure N is declared invalid, maybe the city and the people could come together and put something on the ballot that actually works. And then instead of a general tax, maybe we should have a special tax where we have to get 66% of the voters, because honestly, I don't want all the marijuana money going down the general fund. I'd like it for our parks. I'd like it for our libraries. I'd like it for our schools. I'd like it for our streetlights. I'd like it to secure our businesses and our neighborhoods in this city. I don't want it in the general fund where we can't keep track of it. So these are all things that everybody needs to consider. While this, and I'm making my case because he said that I need to make a case if I want to appeal this to a judge, and I honestly don't feel like the city has a right to force this on somebody. I think this must go to a vote of the people, because the city was already voted out. You've already voted. How can the people vote you out, and then you're like, hey, I can do what I want? I don't think by law that's legal. So thank you for listening. Okay.
Do you have any questions for Carmel Rowe?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yes, Carmel, you made some statements about the state law, and I remember in the Cannabis Committee we were comparing quite a few other city ordinances that have been written along with the state law. I too have read this proposed ordinance, and they have made considerable changes over and above what the committee requested and suggested. And I believe the state law covers everything so clearly that it seemed like to me after that committee that if a city just followed the state law, it would simplify things, it would be good for business and good for the community that it's in. So I have to agree with you.
Thank you, Larry.
I also would like to agree with you on the subject of employees being licensed and the hoops they have to jump through to get the certification. I think we should talk more about that, because it's incredibly complex.
Yes, I would like to follow up on self-certification with Mr. Persico. It is in the Planning Commission staff report on page 4, number 3. It does say self-certification had merit. Does that involving like a sort of some sort of agreement between the city and the operator or the entrepreneur? Or how does that work? Self-certification. How do you self-certify yourself?
First of all, would only be for personal cultivation in somebody's house. So this would not be a process that commercial cannabis activities would go through, and it would be a online registration. One of the ideas that the council talked about was an online registration, again, where somebody would just enter their address, their name, some basic information, and then agree to follow the ordinance. So that would be one process, as I had talked about previously. The other process would be where there would actually be a permit and an inspection required.
Right, thank you. So in terms of the agreeing to the agreement, I guess, would there be some sort of form that they would have to fill out and certifying that you are essentially agreeing to these required items per
Yes, I mean, it would presumably be by signing and accepting, yes, you've agreed to all of the requirements within the city's municipal code.
Thank you.
And just to address that as well, one of the concerns that the council expressed was, they may pass this regulations and no one would know what they are. And so that was one of the goals, I think, when they were talking about the self-certification, was ensuring that people who were engaging in personal cultivation understood what the regulations were for that activity.
Through the chair. Would the self-certification be public records also?
Yes, again, any information that we get would be public record.
Okay. I believe our committee felt that was detrimental to the safety and welfare of the residents of the community if they were to put their name on a list. So, that's for that.
I had one other thing I wanted to say. I was reading about the Orange Show and the Event Center, and
Speak up, please.
I was reading about the Orange Show and the Event Center and the conditional use permit. And mostly the problem with the Orange Show isn't the cannabis events, it's mostly the raves. The cannabis events are very mild compared to the raves, and I feel like, the state it's a state, licensed fair with if you want to charge them a fee, charge them a fee. But I sat at a meeting where the cops say, hey, they participate with the Orange Show, and the Orange Show always pays for the police. So, the Orange Show has been a great part of this city for many years, and we used to have the Swinger Auditorium. And it's a very big part of our history, and I just don't think that we should punish the Orange Show because we want to maybe punish cannabis. I think maybe we should just let the Orange Show deal with the state, and maybe, hey, they can pay a fee, for our cops or reimbursement. But I don't necessarily think that you should be banning or forbidding the Orange Show from having state events or state already licensed events, or the state has pretty much grandfathered them in permission for these cannabis-type events, because you're not regulating the raves, you're not regulating the alcohol, you're not regulating the chicks when they're walking around the street half naked. And with marijuana, the biggest, any event at the Orange Show, the biggest problem I ever just see is the traffic. Okay, but the surrounding businesses, let's just say the Orange Show was not having events. Jack in the Box and Arby's and Carl's Jr. and Wiener Schnitzel, they would be out a lot of money. You know what I mean? There's the Orange Show plus the hotels. If you ever stayed at the Hilton, the amount of people who stay at the Hilton and who book these hotels, the Orange Show brings in a lot of money to this community. So I think we ought to say that the Orange Show is a good community partner, and maybe cut them a little slack and just let them pay, and just maybe, hey, we're having an event this weekend, we need X cops, here's the check. I don't think they'd have a problem with that. I don't think we should be banning them and stopping them from doing what they do.
Before you go, I would like to ask the director to give us an overview or a summary of the regulations that pertain to the Orange Show activities.
I will start and probably let Stephen conclude. I think it's been an ongoing issue between the city and the Orange Show over how much jurisdiction the city has over the Orange Show. The development agreement process does not prohibit the activity. The development agreement is essentially it's not essentially, it is a contract between the city and the operator. And a development agreement, and they are used fairly regularly by cities, not so much in San Bernardino, but in many other cities use development agreements. and they are required to show public benefit. And under the development agreement law, which is very well laid out, and we also have provisions in our development code, as Stephen said earlier, a development agreement would come to the Planning Commission. The Commission would then make a recommendation to the Council, and that development agreement could cover all aspects of the Orange Show. The Council has, under the law, there's a lot of flexibility under the length of time that a development agreement can go for, what activities are permitted under the development agreement, and then what is the city's ability to recover its costs, and then show public benefit. So it is a fairly commonly used planning tool by cities. And I don't know if Stephen has anything to add to that.
I'll just add briefly. Like Mark said, there has been some dispute between the Orange Show and the city over the city's jurisdiction over events held there. I don't see it as an actual dispute. We have an Attorney General opinion on point regarding our regulatory authority over them. SB 94, which is the trailer bill that merged Prop 64 with the medicinal cannabis laws, expressly gives the city jurisdiction over the special cannabis events that are held there. So the jurisdiction exists. And like Mark said, just because this specific ordinance will require a development agreement does not mean that that development agreement necessarily has to be limited only to cannabis events. It could encompass all events that they hold there, so that the rules of the road for the city and for the Orange Show are understood. And a development agreement, it's not actually, it looks a lot like a contract, but it's actually an ordinance of the city. So that would actually give the Orange Show a lot of future certainty and comfort with exactly what the rules are going to be for the events that are held there. So I think that it's a positive thing for the community that's in the section. I usually don't give my own personal opinions on different sections of ordinances that you're considering, but there it is.
Thank you. Did you have any further comments?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, go ahead.
Question for Mr. Graham. So are there limitations in terms of the numbers of licenses that we could have or issue?
Yeah, so under the commercial cannabis activity, the council was originally considering 1 per 10,000 residents, and that's not just dispensaries, that's all commercial cannabis activities, with a specific number depending on the applications, the quality, and perhaps limits set by the council by resolution. The council reduced that to 1 per 12,500 residents, which I think if I did the math, and I went to law school because I'm not good at math, resulted in about 17 citywide.
That's what I
and
thought,
I
about
think
16,
the
okay.
essential logic there was that it is better to start out with this uncertain industry that is in flux smaller and then expand it if necessary, rather than start out large and try to contract it if it doesn't work out.
Thank you. So is it fair to say that potentially we could have a roll of cannabis roll?
So there is no restriction in the ordinance as it's written that would prevent commercial cannabis businesses from being in proximity to each other. That was something that was in the former Measure P, which, as Ms. Rowe noted, did not pass. And the intent there was to avoid concentration of the businesses. That doesn't exist in this current ordinance. And it's certainly something worth considering, whether spreading them out is good or whether allowing them to be closer together is good. I think you can have good reasons for both of those activities. And I think the way it is now, the initial application process, all the initial applications will be heard at one time by the City Council. And so the City Council will have an ability to look at, okay, here's the 15 that are being recommended for approval. Here's where they are. Does that really make sense for our community?
So based on the layout of the general plan, I guess this question will go to Mr. Persico. Where would those businesses be most likely, in the southern or northern portion of the city, based on the current general plan zoning designations?
There are maps which I know are hard to see on the wall, but those maps, and they're not precise because our GIS staff wasn't able to, for instance, non-conforming uses, those are not mapped in the city. We don't have a database of non-conforming residential. So those two maps on the wall show with probably 85% accuracy where the cannabis businesses would be eligible to locate. And these are illustrative maps only, so just as we did with Measure O, we would go through a very thorough review process to make sure that they actually met all of the provisions of the ordinance. But I think those maps speak for themselves. It really does, the standards really do, and I think it makes sense to get them out of residential neighborhoods and get them onto major commercial thoroughfares and along the freeway corridors, and not down into the neighborhoods. That is, I think, the biggest effect of the sensitive use buffers that the City Council imposed. And general plan consistency was a very significant issue, and we've definitely looked very carefully at that, and we believe the ordinance is completely consistent with the general plan.
Thank you.
I'll call on the next speaker, and I'll give the last three initials of your name, EST. EST? I can't read the whole thing. Yes, please state your name and address.
Get rid of my gum. Don't want to be popping it. Name is Mark Estermeyer. Business is located at 1942 North I Street, San Bernardino. And I've poured through this ordinance more than I care to even think about. In fact, I made a joke that HDL must have gotten paid for the number of words that they actually used in the ordinance. Appreciate all those lovely words, but it is extremely restrictive. I lost count of how many times everything was handed over to the city manager after about 50 or 60 times it was mentioned in this ordinance, which basically is saying that the city manager is actually going to need to create some new department that's going to be spending more money to make sure that employees' background checks are met and all of that kind of stuff. And quite frankly, most of this ordinance is quite far-reaching. I do understand the need for the ordinance to actually be written in a way that is conforming to the city's land uses and that kind of stuff. The biggest concern that I had was over the 300-foot buffer on the residence, and then the mayor arbitrarily just threw in there, let's go ahead and just increase it to 600. Very much the same way that he wanted to increase the number from 10,000 up to 12,500, and it was actually thrown out there to 15 to 20,000. And the mayor has made it quite clear that this is not an industry that he wants in his city, and been dragging feet for the past 5 years. And I've been at virtually every meeting that this topic has been talked about, every single one of them. Have not missed a single one. And it's been frustrating for somebody like myself who actually watched his mother-in-law pass away from cancer, and the only thing that she actually got any kind of comfort from was her use of some cannabis products. If you want to talk about quality of life, it definitely provides it. And when you're talking about these buffers, residents, one of the comments that came from, and I can't remember exactly who made the comment at the last council meeting, said that we've found that having the dispensaries located in residential neighborhoods has been detrimental. Well, when you have over 100 of them in the city, yeah, I'm going to agree wholeheartedly that having, half of those located in residential neighborhoods. And that's what you guys are taking a look at. That's what you see. And that is bad, and that's not the way it should be. By having this kind of buffer, now you're penalizing the actual people that actually need the product the most. Okay? Just like somebody who likes to go down to the local water store and they like to buy their bottled water. It's convenient because it's in the neighborhood shopping center and it makes it easy. Okay? People of San Bernardino, the users, and believe me, if there's over 100 shops in San Bernardino, the demand is here. I mean, Measure O already won, but 55%. Measure N had 52, 53%, and Measure P ended up somewhere in the 40s somewhere, really. And the way that P was written was exactly like this, extremely restrictive, extremely, to the point where the city could go ahead and end the program at any given moment, which is in this ordinance also. So after the city issues these permits, they could just come back and say, oh, we goofed, very much like Calaveras County did. They screwed it up so bad it's unbelievable. But when you're thinking about that buffer, think about the grandmother that has to travel down into South San Bernardino. I mean, you talk about creating a green zone. That's exactly what this ordinance does with 300 feet. Take a look at that map. There are very, very, very few properties that would be available where the people actually need the stores to be located. You're forcing your grandmother, your mother, your uncle, the mom who has a severely autistic child, have to drive into an area that they're unfamiliar with, or they may be familiar with, but it's quite frankly too far for them to get to. Okay? By eliminating the ability of having dispensaries, and that's what we're talking about, dispensaries relatively close to neighborhoods that you would actually be able to be serving the community far better than these restrictive this restrictive ordinance that goes along with it. But one of the things that you could do is actually put that barrier in there, that buffer for like businesses, cannabis businesses. You can go ahead and throw it in there for 1,000 feet. That's normal for a lot of cities. 600 feet, 1,000 feet between each dispensary. It happens all the time. I read it all over the place. But with what they're choosing to do is keep it out of the areas where the people need them the most. So please, when you're thinking about that, think about the people that actually need it, not the image or with the way it should be or anything like that. The people actually need it. So give them the opportunity to get it. This employee aspect of it, that is absolutely insane. You talk about far-reaching, sorry, that one was ridiculous. It really was. To have employees have to go through some sort of certification and that kind of thing, beyond words to me. And when it comes to anything that deals with a private citizen in this city having to register and that their name being made public, quite frankly, I would be ashamed to even put that one out there. I mean, you talk about just Fourth Amendment type violations. I mean, that's just plain silly. Just leave that one alone. But there are so many more others. When you take a look at it, don't be afraid to cut it. Send a message and let them know that we're a business-friendly community and that we want to be able to have an industry that actually will grow and thrive in this city. You can still limit the number of businesses that are approved. Just because you have 500 locations in the city that are actually available for a cannabis type operation does not mean that you have to approve 500 licenses. You can go ahead and let them trickle in. You don't have to have all these restrictions placed upon an ordinance that, quite frankly, it's a little bit over the top. If you want to say 17 in the city, okay, by my estimations, 17 storefronts would actually service the city quite well. You haven't even talked about cultivation or manufacturing or anything like that. Honestly, I see the city being able to serve it, to actually have upward to 35, maybe 40 different types of licenses here, and to restrict it in such a way that let's go ahead and send it back to the council. Let them go ahead. And the cannabis community right now does not believe in the city whatsoever, that the council has managed to screw this thing up. And right now, the city needs to actually take into consideration the people behind Measure O, as much as I hated that ordinance, that measure, but they need to take them into consideration to avoid any kind of litigation. Same thing with Measure N. I mean, there is a group of people out there that spend a lot of money on Measure N, and they're not going to lay down and walk away quietly. And it's what I've been saying to the council all along. I said, you got to keep them into consideration. And then you still need to keep the 45% happy, the 45% that did not vote for any kind of cannabis regulation. So you have to take all of those people into consideration. And with the restrictions that you have on this, it's just bad business. Bad business. It's exactly what the state of California is doing right now with businesses throughout the state. What you're doing, it's exactly with what Sacramento is doing. So please, give it some thought. Don't throw down all these restrictions the way that they are. Cut it up. Cut sections out. Say, this is no good. Throw it out. Say, this is not with what we want. So that's basically all that I have. If you have any questions for me, I've been in the areas for pretty close to 4 generations. I'm a San Bernardino resident for years and years. My family's been around for, my dad's been a contractor in San Bernardino. He's a union contractor. I believe in the city, and I believe that there's really good things that can come out of it if you just take the handcuffs off. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Estermeyer. Could you elaborate a little bit on the way the ordinance reads and the testing and certifying and the regulations as far as the employees goes? I'm a contractor. I employ people. I would never be able to employ people the way this is written. Furthermore, I think I'd be in trouble with the DOL.
Yeah, and that's one of my biggest fears about the way that the entire ordinance is written, is that there are several key points throughout it that, in my opinion, is going to call for certain litigation. When it comes to the employee type certification, again, far too restrictive. The state already has a background check in place. They're already doing it for the stakeholders, the people that are actually operating the business, the financial backers. All of that is already handled at the state level. And this ordinance is loaded with all kinds of redundant things that the city is saying that they're going to do, when you just simply let the application go to the state and they're going to do it all for you. So this thing over the employees, there is nothing in state law that says that every employee has to be checked, background check done, make sure that they didn't do something when they were 14 years old, getting caught smoking a joint, behind the dumpster. That's just plain ridiculous. But yeah, the actual cost associated with something like that, overburdensome. Way over the top. But there is a lot that is in this ordinance that the state is already doing, a lot. And why the city is going to step up and say that they need to do it also, it makes no sense to me. None whatsoever. Anything else? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
This is for staff. What are we supposed to be deciding tonight? And what do we have, what's within our purview to decide tonight?
Good question, Commissioner Durr. There were 2 issues specifically that the council wanted the commission to weigh in on. The first was the sensitive use buffer for residential, 300 feet versus 600 feet. And then should a permit be required for personal cultivation? These are all good comments that people are making. The council will have a public hearing that's already been noticed for next Tuesday night. And at that time, the entire ordinance will be up for discussion. The council discussed this on February 7th. That was also a noticed public hearing. it was agendized, but it wasn't noticed as a public hearing because the council was just continuing to take public comment and feedback. So the first official hearing on the ordinance will be next week. But yes, next week everybody will be able to discuss all three ordinances in their entirety.
So as I understand it, the only thing we have to concern ourselves with tonight is the buffer zone and permitting.
Yes, and that's because those are really within the direct purview of the Planning Commission. Many of these other issues are not within the direct purview of the Commission.
Thank you. With that, I would like to call Steve F.
Thanks. I scribbled it really quick. Steve Figueroa, thank you.
Your address, please.
Sure. I live in Riverside, but I'm with the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce, and we support, the cannabis business, and we really like what we hear saying right now, the use protecting small business. As far as the ordinance goes, there's a few clarifying questions we have as far as what you're going to be voting on tonight. For instance, the buffer zone. There's a lot of people that have come to us, and we actually represent some businesses that live like on Mount Vernon, or they live on 3rd or other streets that have non-conforming use properties where they're using it for commercial right next to some neighborhoods. So that's an area that's going to keep coming back to haunt you. So if a place is like on 3rd Street, right across from the sheriff's station, and they have a business there, but right next to it is an apartment complex, and then there's a couple more businesses, it throws everything into like, what are you exactly voting on? Where does that buffer zone? Is it from property line? Is it from door to door? Or is it that is involved in non-conforming use? That needs to be further explained. Also, what needs to be further explained is, does this, what you're voting on, involving joint use, perhaps a grow house with a dispensary? Is that within this ordinance that you're voting on? So can somebody like in Maywood and in other cities where they have a grow house and a dispensary in the same place, and it falls within with the buffer zone, whatever the buffer zone. I like the idea of the natural buffer zones of freeways as well as rivers. It allows for more use, and you really need to consider that to be pro-business friendly. One of the businesses we represent left San Bernardino because of all the overregulation, and code enforcement was a nightmare. Since then we've expanded to 600 people across the state. Could have been here in San Bernardino. But the code enforcement and overregulation was such a nightmare, it wasn't where other cities paid us to go to their city. It was horrible. So please, when you consider this, we're looking for clarification on those questions that I asked on non-conforming use, as, if someone has a house right now being used as a law office, or whatever type of commercial business, and they're on a commercial street where there's restaurants and everything else, but there's also a couple other houses. Are you going to eliminate them? It shouldn't eliminate them because they're already doing business. And then the other, the same thing with these, vacant warehouses here and there. I mean, to restrict it to a single area like you're going to vote on, you're like not only restricting business, but you're making an area where certain row only something can happen. You're going to increase the property value so high there, you're going to have people taking advantage, like you did before of that. So we're hoping that you consider that. I like some of the ideas that we hear. We're totally pro-business. We want to hear more pro-business, less regulation to allow business to flourish. And we thank you.
I do have one question. What do you think is a reasonable buffer?
600 feet. That's what other cities are considering, because we're going to every single meeting across the state.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Terrence McBride.
I live at 17646 Anish Drive, and this is my first meeting, and I had just a lot of thoughts coming through my head, and I can tell that based on what the gentleman said that some of my comments may not be germane to what you're voting on tonight. But I wanted to introduce myself to you and my wife. She's a disabled vet, 100% U.S. Army. I have a 26-year-old autistic, highly functional stepson at home. And we are, I guess we are, that's Mom and I'm Pop. You know, I've been working since I was 12 years old. I looked at this as an opportunity to get out of the rat race and change some things for not only myself and my wife, but our family and our kids that are in college. And one of the things that really concerned me was, you know, we're by the book people. We didn't go out there and set up illegal shops. We're not doing that. But when when Measure O was in place and I called about the permit process, and the gentleman said to me, well, we're going to permit 5 dispensaries. And so I asked him, I said, well, is that a lottery system? He goes, no. We're just going to pick them. And I thought to myself, wow, I could give you my fee today and you've already selected the 5. And, you know, God is my witness. And I say God because one thing I can rely on is that man is corruptible. And one of my concerns is this whole process. How my wife and I can be assured that we're being dealt a fair hand. I mean, this is savings, refinancing of homes. We're not millionaire pot growers or anything like that. You know, we've discovered CBD oils. My wife, you know, with a lot of other veterans in our lives who've been given this regimen of these horrible medications, you know, had people reach out to us and just saying that I need some relief from taking opioids every day. You know, something to help me sleep. You know, so just consider, you know, I don't know what the, out of the 17, how many of those slots are going to be left open for dispensaries. But, you know, even if it's a lottery system, I think it's a lot fairer than just to leave it in the hand of some person, a bureaucrat or what have you, to just go, okay, because then you can always have some noted business guy who looks better on a tax roll than she and I, and then get the benefit of that in selecting those things. So, you know, and we're good, hard working people. We're honest people. We just want an opportunity to help in this community. We've thought that, you know, we can develop a business here. We're residents here, but we can also do a lot of charitable stuff. You know, a lot of these dispensary owners are very good people. They want the opportunity to show that we're good neighbors. I understand that it's been 100 years of bad press on cannabis and all the other things, but just, you know, out of the research that's coming out of Israel, a lot of things that we have seen, you know, it's a good fit for a community that looks for responsible business owners. And so I just want to speak on behalf of those people who are, you know, like I said, you know, we're going to, you know, we're using our savings to try to do this. So, you know, keep that in consideration on fees, you know, accessibility. If not now, maybe down the road in the future, you know, so some of those things make it, it just, you know, so that's all. And I'll be at all the other meetings. Like I said, this is my first one, and we're dedicated. You know, we'll be here. We want to know what's going on. We want to know how we can make the process better for you guys to make the decision. What is it that we need to do to present ourselves as responsible individuals? Yes.
Question from our legal attorney.
Oh, actually, it wasn't a question for you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It was mostly just a comment. I didn't want the public or the commission to be under the impression that those 2 questions were all you were here for. You're here to consider those 3 ordinances in their entirety. Those 2 questions were, like the council has spent a lot of time on this regulation already. Those 2 questions were specific questions that because of the Planning Commission's expertise, especially in areas of zoning and locations, they wanted your specific input on. But the ordinances in their entirety are being considered. Those ordinances, consistency with the general plan, there are specific findings, environmental findings, general plan findings that you're making. So I do want to make sure that was clear. But those 2 issues were 2 issues that the City Council did specifically want you to make sure you spent some brain power on. The other thing was mostly a response to Mr. McBride, and I understand his frustration with Measure O. one of the bases that the city challenged Measure O's validity on was the fact on the opaque method in which certain properties were selected and essentially, in the words of the court, given a monopoly on the marijuana business in the city. That's one of the reasons why the city has spent the last year trying to invalidate that measure. If you look to Section 510-180, it outlines how commercial cannabis business permits are to be granted under this new ordinance. They're going to occur at a public hearing of the mayor and city council. It's not some bureaucrat, it's someone you've elected.
Okay.
Every person within 500 feet of that property is going to give notice. So the neighbors, the other businesses in the area will be given an opportunity to have their voice be heard too. So I just wanted to make sure that those two things were brought to the commission.
Well, thank you for that clarification, and I excuse my ignorance on that. I'm going to drill down into this new ordinance. I've just spent a good portion of last year trying to prepare ourselves to be ready for Measure O, and things have kind of changed. So, that's good, So we'll see you folks at the next meeting.
Thank you. I think it's Mario Suraj.
First name is Majid, M-A-J-I-D, last name Siraj, S-E-R-A-J. Address is 1849 West Redlands Boulevard in Redlands, California. I want to thank the Commission and City Council and Mr. Persicchio and HDL, Matt Eaton and David McPherson for really turning something around really quickly. I'll kind of tell you how I arrived here, but in 1 week they generated a fairly comprehensive document that we're all talking about. This is government at work at warp speed. But my connection with cannabis is that I'm a chemist and a pharmacist, a practicing pharmacist for 20 years, 12 years of clinical pharmacy and about 10 years of formulation development chemistry. I was summoned to go to Minnesota when they were passing their regulations to help with some formulation development. They licensed 2 facilities with very restrictive medical indications, and those businesses had a very hard time surviving because the state had very limited access to various medical indications. After I got back from Minnesota, I went to, every April there's a big conference in Boston on the grounds of Harvard Medical Center. It's called CannaMed, where practitioners from around the world come and talk about therapeutic cannabis. I met Raphael Machulam there. He's the Israeli organic chemist who discovered the structure of THC. So it was wonderful to meet someone who's kind of the grandfather of this field. But when I came back to Redlands, it was fairly restrictive in terms of doing work for therapeutic purposes. I went before the city council and it was very restrictive. So when Measure O came around, I again, similar to the gentleman before me, approached the city. I said, this is fairly restrictive. They said, well, welcome to city government. I said, this is not merit-based. The opportunity is not there for others. They said, well, this is the way it is. So I continued to follow the developments, and I'm delighted that, as I said, HDL, the Commission and the City Council is giving opportunity to businesses to come to San Bernardino and kind of to shed light a little bit outside of dispensaries. So imagine a big pharmaceutical company was coming to town. I think a lot of people would embrace them with open arms. Again, as a micro business, as a nano business, these are wonderful laboratories of experimentation for the regional demand that's here. The regional demand here is Loma Linda Medical Center. I worked there for 12 years as a clinical pharmacist. They're building a new pediatric hospital. The hospital is doing a lot of research for pediatric seizures, of all things with CBD. Pharmaceutical companies are funding that. I've dispensed CBD at the hospital. under very strict investigational protocols. But those could be made here. You don't have to get it from a pharmaceutical company. If the Olympics were coming to town, I think everyone would be jumping up and down. If the Super Bowl was coming to town, everyone would be jumping up and down. So I think we need to expand the horizons outside of the dispensary model and maybe think about micro businesses and how they could thrive. Micro businesses manufacture, micro businesses distribute, micro businesses dispense, maybe in large-scale deliveries. So again, I want to thank the Commission and the City Council and the consultants and Mark for all the work. But also, please consider the buffer zone in terms of kind of relating to what this discussion is about, buffer zones. I think we need to get a little bit more granular and get into the weeds a little bit, pun intended, to look at the buffer zones in terms of the specific license that is being administered or given. For example, if you're a micro business or if you're a manufacturer or a closed-door facility, maybe the zoning requirements might be a little different. No one is coming to your place. You're closed door. You're delivering stuff. So maybe 600 feet or 300 feet or 400 or 500 feet, 300 feet might not be an issue. You're a closed-door facility. Out of sight, out of mind. No one knows what you're doing. You're a closed door. You don't have a sign on the door. You're delivering therapeutic products to patients. But again, I'm delighted to be here before you. As I said, I approach this as a scientist and as a pharmacist and a chemist. I'm looking for a business opportunity here in San Bernardino. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Penman.
Good evening, James Penman, 221 East Marshall Boulevard, City of San Bernardino. Pleased to be here. Also have counsel with Milligan, Beswick, Levine, and Knox. I was pleased that Mr. Graham made the clarification in response to Commissioner Durr's question about what is desired of the Planning Commission, because certainly there are specific areas, as the Mr. Pasicchio, I apologize for not knowing what your current title is, but in the old days we would say the Planning Director said, yep, thank you, sir. And that is certainly was what the council wanted, but your role is much broader than that. You are able to weigh in tonight on anything that is on this agenda and in your backup, especially the proposed ordinance. And I can assure you from my intimate relationships with city councils over 26, 30 years that they will listen to you. That doesn't mean they will agree with you, but they will listen to what you have to say and they will consider what you have to say. The process that has gone on has been difficult and fraught with peril. The committee appointed, in my opinion, should have been given a broader purview than was done, and they certainly did not have enough time to handle everything and address everything that they needed to handle. And I think they did a fantastic job given the time they had and the direction that they had. However, there are a number of other factors that I'm going to go over, your tolerance permitting, with this particular ordinance. First, I want to start off on the role of the law firm of Milligan, Beswick, Levine, and Knox. When Measure O was about to take effect January 1 was it last year, I think it was, Stephen? Mr. Graham, excuse me, was that correct? I contacted the city attorney's office and asked what the city's position would be on Measure O. And I was informed that the city was going to defend Measure O all the way because that's what the voters had approved. Our firm argued against that. We pointed out that Measure O created a zoning monopoly. We pointed out that it was created impermissible spot zoning, and we were confident that the court would overturn it. confident to a certain point. Certainly Roger, what's his last name? Thank you. Certainly Mr. Diamond. His name sometimes escapes me. The city attorney's office in my tenure defeated him so many times that we often just lost track of him. But in any event, sometimes he can come up with a measure-saving matter. In any event, we called a number of city council members, and we encouraged them to support the city attorney's office and encourage the city attorney's office in joining in the lawsuit that Milligan, Beswick, Levine, and Knox was filing challenging Measure O. And we were later informed by the city attorney's office that the council voted to do that. And we got the support of the city council in our lawsuit against Measure O. When things got going a little difficult because of the cost of maintaining that lawsuit, one of the people that we had represented, Carmel Rowe, had some discussions with her, and it was decided that the prudent thing to do, in case our clients found they could no longer afford the expensive Measure O litigation, would be for her to get involved separately. We would withdraw, she would discharge us as her counsel. And we've made this has been commented on before a number of times, and I'm not revealing any confidentiality. And as the city attorney's office pointed out, she took the pleadings that Milligan, Beswick, Levine, and Knox had filed and copied them into her lawsuit. So thus we made sure that the court heard those arguments. Other people and other challenges included the fact that the Measure O was inconsistent with the general plan. We gave a nod to that. We included that in our pleadings, but really the argument that was going to carry the day, if it was going to be carried at all, was going to be spot zoning and monopoly. Carmel Rowe, those of you who don't know, is quite an accomplished person. She's a law student. She has handled already one case on her own that's gone to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal and won. There are a lot of lawyers who are members of the bar who cannot say they've won at the Ninth Circuit. And she's a person that I have often listened to throughout my career for a variety of reasons. Several things that I would encourage you to do regarding this ordinance, and I am speaking to the Commission, but I'm also addressing my remarks somewhat to Mr. Graham, give him kind of just some other legal input, which he is certainly free to accept or reject as he and his office deem appropriate. San Bernardino City's charter is amended many times successfully, and you can put an ordinance before the voters and get it passed, and just as you can a charter, and it's not going to be perfect, and you're going to need to go back and amend it, and sometimes you may have to do that. The key here, in my opinion, is pass an ordinance that can be presented to the voters and upheld by the voters. Because there are other folks who are going to present an ordinance that's going to go to the voters. And the city's going to have to come up with an ordinance that can withstand voter scrutiny. And I would go so far as to encourage the city in drafting this ordinance to consider hiring a political consultant, a smart one. Doesn't have to be one of the expensive ones, but one who can give you an idea of what's going to fly with the voters and what isn't. Because you can draft the perfect ordinance from the standpoint of a city, from the standpoint of a planning commission or a city council, and certainly from the standpoint of the city manager, only to have it voted down and have a monstrosity such as Measure O passed. You don't need that. I mean, then all of this time goes for naught. So one of the first things I would consider, encourage you to consider, is to separate the issues of personal cultivation from commercial cultivation. And I'm not sure I'd even have it in the same ordinance. There's arguments pro and con on that. But think heavily about that, because personal cultivation gets to the heart of the individual voter in a way that commercial cultivation does not. And I think you're opening a real Pandora's box when you start talking too much about regulating personal cultivation as compared to commercial cultivation. Second, the Orange Show. I'd like to dispose of that rather quickly. Mr. Graham quite correctly pointed out SB 94, which does give the city jurisdiction. The city absolutely has jurisdiction. We did have ongoing battles and have had them for the last 30 years, including the 26 years that I was there. On again, off again. I think the idea of entering into an agreement with the Orange Show is an excellent one. They're here. It's my understanding of the law, and I haven't looked at this carefully, and so I asked Mr. Graham to correct me if I'm wrong, that the only places it can put on the marijuana-related events are citrus fairs. Is that correct or is that incorrect? May I ask, Mr. Graham?
Through the chair, if you don't mind. It is district agricultural events and state fairs.
Well, excuse me, I think of San Bernardino and the Orange Show Citrus Fair. Yes, thank you for that part.
But yeah, essentially.
And the Orange Show is the only one that we have in our jurisdiction, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So we need to work with them, and I think the idea of coming up with an agreement with the Orange Show where their board agrees and our council agrees on what can be done is an excellent way of handling that problem, and I wouldn't spend too much time on it beyond that. Next, and I don't know if you have it in your backup. I've borrowed the public copy of the ordinance here. Do you guys have copies of the ordinance in front of you? Okay, you might want to look at page 24, section 5.10.250B1. And this is, I believe, the first ordinance that's in the backup, I believe the longer one. And on page 24, it's on the lower left-hand corner. And someone else asked, buffer zone, what should it be? I would agree it should be 300 feet from residentially zoned. 600 feet, I think there's some state law involved in that as well, from schools, kindergarten, mini grades 1 through 12. And you have some other things in here, that's whatever. The 300 feet, though, I think there's some concern about residentially used parcels. We have residentially zoned parcels and residentially used parcels. Residentially zoned parcels are parcels where housing can be built. Residential use are where residents currently are there. They may have been put there under a prior zoning, or they may have been put there under a variance. And the city of San Bernardino prior to 1987 shamelessly gave out variances. Anybody who had the money for a permit could pretty much get one, which is why we have apartments in almost every residential area of the city. There are legal problems. I don't want to say problems. There are legal issues that impact residentially used or non-conforming uses is what they're called. If a residence is there and it isn't zoned residential, it's a non-conforming use. It's legal, but there's a lot of problems with it. There's certain things they're not supposed to be allowed to do with that property. Down the road, it may be a problem. Certainly, any residentially zoned property, no cannabis business should be within 300 feet. I would really think carefully in terms of future challenges and even voter approval, because I can put on my old politician's hat and I can see some things that you could do with that in an election with the non-conforming uses. On page 18, that the permit shall not exceed 12 months, 510.110, and I'll take them together on page, I believe it's 72 or 22. 5.10070, employee permits, 12 months permits. Please, please, please do not go there. Do not limit any permits to 12 months. You are asking for legal challenges that you will probably ultimately lose, depending on how high up, and I don't know how, put it this way, I don't know how high up you may have to go. But I would encourage the city to consider the fact that when we are giving licenses to certain people for a certain type of work in the city, certain permits from the police department, like, the dining, whatever they used to be, the dining permits and so forth, we can only go back and consider a person's criminal record a certain period of time. This is open-ended, and I think that invites challenges, and I think it's challenges that are likely to, some of them are likely to succeed with those 12-month limits. And it's especially dangerous when you get into the area of licensing employees, when you say that an employee can only have a license for 12 months. I can almost guarantee at some point that's going to be challenged, and the likelihood of that being upheld is not real strong. I think there's a good chance of that. Part of the reason that the business licensing, in my opinion, will probably not be upheld is because the entire context of this ordinance requires anyone wishing to open a marijuana business in the city to expend and invest a great deal of money. And I would refer you to page 32, 5.10.310, odor control. The exhaust air filtration system is one example. That is not an inexpensive endeavor. Now, you're going to have people, including maybe some in the audience, are going to think, well, put up a one-way exhaust system and a good old fan and blow it into a circulating. Ain't going to work. You're looking at very expensive, and we have some in the city that have already been built, and they have never cultivated or sold marijuana there. And they were very expensive. And I can tell you that that's the caliber of people and business you want in this industry. You do not want those who are going to come up with, just a duct system and fans. If you expect them to invest that kind of money and have a permit for only 12 months, you can think again. That's going to be a real problem. And by limiting those permits to a duration of 12 months, you are substantially impacting the universe which is going to be interested or not interested in coming to San Bernardino, and the people that you may get. And I would really encourage the city to take a hard look at that. I understand probably better than anybody in this room, if I may be so rude as to say, why this ordinance is written the way it is and why cities want to control things. But the window is closing on cities getting into this business and regulating it properly. And one more setback like Measure O, and that window's probably going to close before you guys get on board. And I can't see you taking an ordinance passed by the council and then suddenly coming up with another one and putting it on the ballot. I think whatever ordinance they pass, they need to be ready to put on the ballot. As my understanding, one such ordinance has already gone to the city attorney's office, already had the impartial analysis prepared, and it's probably going to be on the ballot in November, and the city's going to have to do something to keep this one alive, or whichever one the city passes alive. And that needs to be constantly in everybody's mind, because otherwise, we're just on a treadmill up here and at the council meeting, and some guy is going to come in again with another ordinance that's going to benefit a handful of people. Now, this one is really problematic, and my comments are not going to endear me to my good friend and colleague, city manager. 5.10.370 on page 37. City manager is authorized to establish any additional rules and regulations and standards. Don't go there. Don't put that in there. The voters will vote it down. They will vote it down. It will not pass. It will be voted down. You're coming right up in their face, and you're saying, we don't care what you vote to pass. If we don't like it, what we're asking you to pass allows the city manager to make changes. You can do it. You can do things in a more subtle way. Needs may arise as time goes on, and they will. Things that are not in this ordinance, experience will teach you, will cause the city to realize, hey, we got a problem here, we got to change this. Do like we did with the charter for years, and it worked time and time again. Got a good argument. Submit it to the voters and change it. This will kill, this will never pass with this in it. And I can tell you, there are people out there who plan to invest substantial sums of money in the election coming up on that ordinance. And that is going to be a prime issue. But the city can achieve what it wants in other ways, and there are even other ways that the ordinance can be worded where the city can do the corrections that are needed. But that one jumps right out at you, and that'll kill it, because that's telling the voters, as will be pointed out in campaign literature, the city doesn't care what you pass, because they've put in this ordinance the ability to change the whole thing. And believe me, any halfway astute political consultant is going to focus on that and make that an issue. And an argument is going to be, why should you approve an ordinance that the city gives you when the city's playing a game with you? I mean, they're going to say that the city's trying to do the same thing to you voters that was done with Measure O. Only this time it's a city doing it. Don't go there. See, 5.10.100A2. A2 is the applicant was notified that they were conducting commercial cannabis activity in noncompliance with Chapter 19 or other City of San Bernardino ordinances, cities, and codes and requirements in which they failed to discontinue operating in a timely manner. Now let me pause and tell you something. There is no way the council is going to pass an ordinance, in my opinion, that's going to allow people who have been illegally growing and selling marijuana in the city for commercial purposes to get a license. It ain't going to happen. It just isn't. And that's already in here, and that's what I'm reading from now. The second is 4. Where the applicant or the owner of the property upon which proposed commercial cannabis activities to occur have conducted commercial cannabis activity in the city of San Bernardino in violation of local and state law or failed to report income from such activities to the federal, state, or local government in violation of federal, state, or local law. Again, I know exactly where it's coming from, and that's going to, it doesn't matter what the folks here from out of town who've been running illegal marijuana commercial businesses in the city want. The council's not going to do that. They're not. And if they were coming to our law office and paying us the outrageous fees that we charge, I would tell them, if you've been doing it and you've got an ACP or you got a citation, go to another city, because you're not going to get a license in San Bernardino. By the same token, and I understand that the person that I talked about earlier and whom I have a lot of respect for is arguing let the state law handle it. There are pros and cons to that argument, but I can tell you the city council will never do that unless they make a mistake or an error and it happens by accident. They will never approve of the just defaulting to the state on this, at least not this current mayor and council. So you can get up here and argue and ask them to do it, but your plea is going to fall on deaf ears. And one of the things we have to do as lawyers, you have to be realistic. Your clients come in and they want a lot, but what can you get for them? What can you get under the law? What can you get in terms of negotiating with the other people that you have to negotiate with? It might be somebody who wants to buy property and negotiating with a seller. It might be a planning commission. It might be a city council. You need to look at that. Now, so on those two, getting back to that, there are no time limits on this. The applicant was notified that they were conducting commercial cannabis activity in noncompliance. You're getting into some interesting areas there where people have not pled guilty or no contest or been found true to have been doing that, just where they've been notified. I would take a hard look at that. And also, now, if you put it out where they've been issued a citation, where they've been issued an ACP, and the hearing officer has upheld that, you've got a pretty good basis at that point. But the way I see it written right now, I see that being open to challenge and very likely a successful challenge, in my opinion. And I would also look again at what is the time period when you can, and this is on the license or employee work permit, both. Any person, which includes individual, firm, partnership, joint venture, association, corporation, limited liability company, estate, trust, business, et cetera, that has been notified they were conducting a commercial cannabis activity in noncompliance with Chapter 19 or have failed to comply with local and state law, put the time in there, the time period that state law pretty much recognizes for those activities, because this is open-ended the way it is now, and I don't think that's going to hold up. Also, I understand how a city manager form of government works, but don't expect the voters to understand it. Even those who voted for it and voted it in, don't expect them to understand the language that we often put into city ordinances in deference to the city manager form of government we have. We need to go beyond this if you want to get this thing passed. If you don't want to get it passed, then do pretty much what you want. The council committee did not consider the ability of a potential ordinance to pass voter approval, and I don't think that they were advised of or heard some of the things that you've heard today discussed in presentations to them. And I think that they might have had some slightly different thoughts, opinions, even maybe some conclusions that they had. I would say to those who are on that committee, don't be offended when the council doesn't follow your recommendations. Happened to me all the time. It happens to planning commissions all the time. It's just part of the government process. It doesn't mean that they're not considering what you're recommending, and it doesn't mean it's not having some impact on what you're doing, because it is. But when you get to that point, it's not a time to say, oh, wait a minute, the committee recommended this and you did that. Again, you're spinning your wheels. The bottom line is, by law, a city is governed by the highest elected body, and it's on them. It's on them sometimes personally, and they feel it's personally, and they really feel it's personally when it's election time and somebody's running against them and says, you did this and you should have did that, and hindsight's better than foresight, and that's proven. So what you try to do when you're developing these ordinances is you try to look ahead, and you don't only look ahead in terms of what you want, what would be the best possible ordinance, because I've never seen the best possible ordinance on anything. I've always seen some ways to improve it. What would be the best for the form of government we have? Think about this as what would be the best if it goes before the voters, and how is somebody who wants to kill this ordinance, how are they going to present that to the voters? Because that's what you're really going to end up with. So I hope that the folks, I was on the city's police commission. I was chairman of it back in the 70s. I was on the Human Relations Commission. I was on the Civil Service Commission, where the council could not overturn this, but that was the only one I was on. They couldn't. The others they could. And it's not fun to spend all that time and work and do it, but you are making an important contribution, and it's something that really needs to be done. So I would encourage you to consider all of these things. I don't come here for applause. I'm never going to run for office again. I'm here for my clients, but also for something that's going to work. It does my clients no good if you pass an ordinance that's going to be overturned by a court or voted down by the voters. They've spent a lot of money that they've wasted. They really have. And I think you're very fortunate to have a person as capable advising you on this as Stephen Graham. I happened to have today just about 3 hours ago, I had a conversation with his mother at the Mexico restaurant. Mrs. Penman and I were just finishing, and she was coming in. And I told her he was one of the best hires in the city attorney's office I ever made, that I've seen him in court, I've seen him before the planning commission, I've seen him before the council, and he does a really good job. And I know Stephen won't do, I know Mr. Graham won't do anything that would cause me to call his mom and tell her that I made a mistake. Thank you very much. Yes.
I want to ask a question of either Mr. Graham or Mr. Persico. What is the City Council's time frame for passing these ordinances?
There is a public hearing currently scheduled for next Wednesday, the 21st, to open the public hearing and to consider the draft ordinance. I think what was very clear when the moratorium was extended from the community to the council and then the council to staff was to do this as expeditiously as possible. So they are scheduled to have a public hearing next week. We never know what's going to happen at that hearing, but they are going to open the hearing. And their goal is, the council's goal is, as the staff's, to get this done as quickly as possible.
Is there any chance that the council would want to put this out for review by an independent law firm?
We believe we have adequate expertise, both on staff and then our consultants, HDL. They have worked in a number of communities, dozens and dozens of communities all up and down the state. So we are very confident that the ordinance is legal and it is defensible. Obviously, people will, everything is subject to challenge, so there's nothing to say that it won't be challenged. It's probably fair to assume that it will be challenged. But yeah, we're very confident. We didn't do all of this work, and we wouldn't be here this evening if we believed we had an ordinance that was not defensible.
Mr. Graham.
I can address the general tone of the city's council's charge to both staff and also to the Planning Commission in submitting these ordinances to you for your consideration. At the extension of the moratorium hearing, there was significant community feedback that, we've spent this time to get Measure O validated. The CAC spent a significant amount of time on numerous consecutive weeks to consider the other items, and that they wanted this issue resolved. I know that we put a lot of time and a lot of work into the regulatory ordinance that you have in front of you. And while it may seem to build us up to say it's incredibly complicated, the truth is it's not rocket science. It's long, it's complicated, but there, I'm so happy to have Mr. Penman here, going to specific sections and giving some feedback. There's 40 to 50 pages of ordinance here, and we got feedback on 5 specific things. That's a lot of progress in a week. I did want to address a couple things, if I might, Chair. Although it is listed as Development Code Amendment 18-1A, B, and C, it is 3 separate ordinances, Mr. Penman. Personal cultivation, although it may look a little weird the way it's on here, they are separate ordinances and they will be adopted as separate ordinances.
I'm glad to hear that, because I did notice they were separate, but was concerned about some of the language I heard.
They will be considered and approved separately. As far as the Orange Show, we agreed that, and the council agreed that that was an elegant solution to essentially sit down and come to a negotiated resolution for how we're going to live with each other. The other feedback is well taken, and certainly it's something that the Planning Commission can consider if it chooses to, and it's something that the City Council can consider if it chooses to. And those were removing the use-sensitive buffer, whether you want to just have the sensitive buffer from zones take the use out because those non-conforming residential uses are in, by definition, commercial and industrial zones already. That doesn't mean that those uses and proximity to those uses can't be considered when applying appropriate conditions or when making a final determination on the application. The change of the 12-month license, 12 months is pretty standard in a lot of the business regulatory ordinances that both this city has and other cities have enacted. But Mr. Penman is correct, especially when you're talking about the large-scale industrial cultivation and manufacturing activities. Those are expensive. They're expensive it's expensive even to make an application. Certain of these uses may require an EIR be performed prior to it even being considered. So that's certainly something you can consider if you have feedback for us to take to the council. Regarding the regulations, again, there's something there to give flexibility to the city. This is an ever-changing regulatory environment. HDL has given us a lot of feedback about the experiences in other states that have gone recreational, including Colorado, that the conditions in this industry change and the city needs to be flexible. You know, we have different levels of laws that have different levels of flexibility. The charter is generally the least flexible. It's very difficult to change, all the way down to regulations that are promulgated by the city manager, which are much more flexible. If you had suggestions on that, absolutely they can be considered and taken to the city council. I would say that the way it is written is not like the city manager can willy-nilly decide. They have to be consistent with the purposes of the ordinance as it's written. And then the last thing, the disqualification of the previous operators. The city council did have some discussion on that section, and it seemed essentially unanimous amongst them. There didn't seem much controversy in disqualifying individuals who have demonstrated an inability to follow the law previously. Why would we expect them to follow the law now? But the point on whether a distinction between notified and whether they'd actually been found to have violated by a hearing officer is well taken, and certainly something our office will consider. I don't think the council is going to have much interest in hiring an outside law firm to do a review on this. They want to move quickly, and also they have me on salary and other attorneys, so they don't have to pay me any extra. They can just make me continue to review things like this. That doesn't mean it's perfect. I already have found a significant number of typos even in the version you have in front of you. I hope you'll forgive them. We were moving quickly, and there will be changes as it goes to the council that aren't substantive, but that do clean up ambiguities, incorrect definitions, things like that. So that's a very long-winded reply to Mr. Penman's comments.
Anybody comment on that?
Yeah. First of all, I agree with just about everything that Mr. Graham has said. And I agree with what Mr. Persico said and I hope, Mr. Persico, I'm pronouncing your name properly, because there was someone here a while back who had a name a little similar to yours, and I sometimes get that confused. With a slight amendation, I think the ordinance that is the final ordinance will be one that's defensible and will be one that everyone can have confidence in. I think what we have before us now is a good second or third draft, and I'm not here to challenge the city attorney's office by any means. I'm here to make my suggestions and work in concert with them. We have an excellent city attorney's office. I don't think we need to hire personally an outside firm to weigh in. I think that the amount of money that you'll spend on them will outweigh the value of whatever they may have to offer. I think the city attorney's office is perfectly capable of it. And I understand, even if everyone else doesn't, that what's in this backup today is not the final ordinance that's going to be voted on by the mayor and council. Otherwise, there'd be no reason to have you guys weigh in on this at all. There'd be no reason to have public hearings on the 21st. Because the council, as you do, needs to hear additional input. The city attorney's office here is very open to listening to their colleagues, and I have a lot of confidence in them, and I don't think that And again, what I'm saying is not a challenge. I'm here to point out some things that may have already been discovered by the city attorney's office, and if not, this is just it's the way we did things when I was city attorney. We sat around and we asked questions and pointed out things and asked questions, and I suspect Mr. Sines does it the same way. And this is a evolving ordinance as it's before you. It's here for your input. It's not here for you to say, yes, this is the ordinance we want today. And I don't think that's what the city attorney expects, and I don't think it's what the mayor and council expect.
One more comment. I think this is being presented to the public as an urgency ordinance. No? What was the term you used? Expeditious or?
Yes, the council wanted us to move expeditiously on this, and that was, as Stephen and I have noted, really responding to the public's concern that because the moratorium was extended for 10 months and 15 days, there was concern that we would take an unnecessarily long period of time. So the only thing that was done as an urgency ordinance was the first moratorium that the council adopted back in December, or November, excuse me. So this is being done through the regular process. It's just being done much faster through the regular notification process.
Mr. Penman.
Yes, I think if you look in your backup to the February 7, 2017 memorandum from the city manager to the mayor and council on the draft cannabis regulations, and they are in their draft. Let's see, it looks like there's not a page number, so it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Approximately page 6 of that document says next steps, and it lays out, because you'd asked about the time frame. And before I reiterate repeat what's in this memo, I would just say the council is under the gun. They understand that window is closing. They understand they've got to get this ordinance on the books, and they're also running against the election time clock of getting something on the ballot. So they don't have a lot of time to spare. Under next steps, it points out that the Planning Commission is scheduled to conduct a notice public hearing on Development Code Amendment on February 13, 2018. The public hearing necessitated the Planning Commission conduct a special meeting on February 20, 2018 to hear their regular agenda items. Public hearing notice is also being published such that the Mayor and City Council can consider adopting a regulatory ordinance on February 20, 2018, in other words, the first reading. The second reading of the ordinance will be scheduled for March 7, 2018, and the ordinance will become effective on the 31st day following second reading, which would mean approximately April 8th by my calculations, and I'm no mathematician. Now, that schedule can obviously change, and I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't change somewhat. But I think to respond to your question, Mr. Chairperson, that's what the city manager is the timetable she was projecting at the most recent council meeting on this.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Penman? Apparently we don't, so thank you very much. Sung Kim.
Good evening, City Planning Commission. Thank you for having me. Wow. I just don't know where to begin. There's so much to say. 70% of the businesses, cannabis businesses, will fail. That's a fact, I think, according to HDL's study. Which means that no matter what you guys pass here or in the next few months, people who want to do business here are going to fail. And this ordinance that has been quickly written does a number of things to damage small local businesses. Friday I spent all day up on East Street talking to small businesses, an art supply store, a bike store. I went to Fighting Chance. It's really hard to do business in the city, even if it's not cannabis. And so nobody wants to start a business in the city of San Bernardino right now. I certainly don't. It's just it would break my heart to do it because I couldn't make any money. I'm falling in love with San Bernardino for many reasons. I mean, today the weather was so fantastic. I'd been sick for 4 days. I caught a cold Friday just visiting a bunch of people and a bunch of kids. I was in bed. I couldn't get up until yesterday. And I had some cannabis butter, and I had some, and I was able to rest and sleep. And today I feel so much better. I'm still sweating and not well, but I feel that this is so important for us to ponder and to go over and to be really clear about what's happening. Is it Matt Eldon from HDL? We had a short conversation, and he told me that it is true that most businesses in California, cannabis businesses in California, are not making any money right now. The price of cannabis is dropping so fast that it is impossible for anyone to make money, and it will be so for at least 2 more years. The kind of revenue that you may be thinking about for the city is not going to come through taxes or through movement of cannabis. If it's going to be anything, it's going to be people coming here, attracted to the city, leaving their money here, and enjoying their time here. And of course, San Bernardino is the cheapest available real estate in Southern California right now, and people are headed this way no matter what. I don't know this issue well enough, but I know that if this ordinance is held up in any way, the underground market will thrive. The underground market will thrive. This ordinance is prejudiced toward African Americans. This ordinance is based on merit, which was caused by the city not dealing with the ordinances and putting people at risk, and now those people will never ever be able to start their small business here in San Bernardino, even though what have they really done? This ordinance also smacks of what people think is governmental control and regulation, and to me it's like communism in that it's so bureaucratic and ruled by people who have no idea what the industry is, where it is and where it's going and what it is. I don't think we've even defined what the marijuana or cannabis industry is in California. If you look at in Las Vegas, the people who put $10 million grows in can't make any money. In Oregon State, there's an oversupply of marijuana and the black market is thriving. In California, no businesses can make any money because it's overly regulated. It's going to be a long ways before I think you guys get the kind of information that helps you guys make the right decisions. I just want to say, please do not make people sign up for permits for personal grows and make them vulnerable to government intrusion to grow medicine that makes you feel better when you're sick. If you have seen cancer patients affected after taking cannabis and how much better they feel, you understand that the compassion that you need for this industry is I mean, you need compassion for this. This is not a criminal activity. Please, this ordinance sounds like it's a criminal activity, and we're going to use police to enforce something that doesn't need law enforcement to enforce. All you need is an inspector to make sure a building is safe. And specifically, let me just end with, please allow dispensaries without a buffer next to non-conforming residential uses. And also, conforming residential uses keep to 300 feet buffer. I think that's all I have to say. If anyone else would like to ask me any more questions, I have a lot of information for you. I'm available. You know, there are things that you may want to know, like how much is it to create a pound of marijuana? Anyone know that here? Have any questions?
I have a question and some comments as well. Thank you for coming and participating in this process as we're moving along, trying to get more information about this as we're moving forward in regards to this ordinance. I wasn't aware of the HDL statistics that you stated earlier that say that 70% of the businesses will fail once commencing. I think in conjunction with this ordinance that's currently being proposed with the strenuous requirements and regulations, I think that it could possibly make it even much more difficult to have a viable business climate within the city. And also, you had made a point earlier in regards to the ordinance, to it possibly disproportionately or targeting African Americans. Did you have any more information that you could possibly share with the commission on how that is occurring with this ordinance, the way it's being proposed?
Well, I think it's pretty common knowledge that the African American community has been targeted for drug use, and that high percentage of the African American community have been either incarcerated or have been charged for drug use, even minor possession. That means that you are disqualified. When all over the United States, they're actually trying to rescind past convictions because it is understood that African Americans have unfairly suffered from the laws, the war on drugs. And this is just one more example of it. And it's written into this ordinance. If you read it, it's called merit. And I don't understand why the police have to be used to regulate an agricultural medical product. It doesn't make any sense. This is not a criminal activity where people are going to make millions and millions of dollars anymore. There's so much misunderstanding and myth both from the industry and from the government. And this city is one of the last cities to deal with this question, and will be looked at. If we create something that is a model for the rest of the nation, this city is poised to become the golden city that it could be. We have everything we want here. This city doesn't even need the federal government, really. We have everything here. Everything. Thank you.
Mr. Graham.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that the commission was aware of what the disqualifying crimes were. That would be a crime that demonstrates that the applicant is dishonest, has committed a felony or misdemeanor involving fraud, deceit, or embezzlement, was convicted of a violent felony or crime of moral turpitude. So those are all related to the character of the applicant. And seeing as how that this is a highly regulated industry, both at the state level, at the local level, and if it ever is permitted at the federal level, it will likely be highly regulated there as well. Those disqualifications seem to make sense. Related to drug-related convictions and offenses, it's the illegal use, possession, transportation, distribution, related to controlled substances as defined in the Federal Controlled Substances Act, except for cannabis, post-1996. So a post-1996 conviction of cannabis possession, transportation, or distribution would not be a disqualifying conviction under the ordinance that you have in front of you. Other drugs, though, yes.
Although it wouldn't disqualify them, I see that with the merit-based point system that's being implemented, would those charges be actually taken into consideration or lower their point score on the actual process compared to other applicants that are also being reviewed through the application process?
That's an excellent question. The exact point scales and what's considered will be determined by the City Council after they pass the ordinance. I mean, honestly, we can only put so many things down on a page and get it out in time. But that's certainly a consideration for the City Council when they adopt the review criteria, when they adopt the point system. That's certainly something that the community can bring to their attention, how they want or whether they want those convictions or the person's past history with drug offenses specifically to be considered and to what extent they want it considered. But it does not automatically disqualify them under the ordinance.
Thank you.
We have two more speakers, and I would like to call about a 5-minute recess at some point, either before or after the next two speakers. Does anybody have a preference? If not, I'll call the next speaker. Kevin Mayfield.
How you guys doing?
Fine.
All right. Just real quick, have any of you guys ever been to a dispensary? Ever? Ever? Like, I would love for you guys to come in one day. Just, I mean, or maybe you guys don't want to admit it or whatnot, but that's fine. But I would really like for you guys to come in. I mean, because it's, I don't want to say it's just like a regular business. Like the lovely lady said earlier, there's this misconception that you just have gang members or Cheech and Chong type people just sitting up smoking, and that's not the case. And when my man was talking about the black market will thrive, it will. I mean, it's been probably 15, 20 years, I don't know how long, but you used to have to meet someone at the gas station or do this, and, you know, and people get incarcerated. But if you come over here and please, I mean, you'll see these patients, and this isn't someone just, they're not full of it when they're saying that these cancer patients come in here. We have a gentleman that comes in every Saturday, and he's just, I just need something for the pain. And it's crazy, because I used to, when I first heard about cannabis and helping with cancer patients, I thought it was just a myth. I just didn't believe it until you see it firsthand. And I think what it is maybe you guys don't indulge in cannabis or know anyone that does it, so you probably think it's horrible, and that's fine, that's fair. But you're misinformed greatly, and you guys just really, it doesn't make sense for a city that needs money to just turn money away. Like, it makes zero sense at all. Like, I don't understand it at all. I'm
Could
sorry.
I interrupt
Yeah,
for a minute?
absolutely.
Could you give your name and address, please, for the record?
Oh, yeah, Kevin Mayfield, 8142 Garden Park Street, Chino, California. All right. And the buffer, the whole 300, oh, I'm sorry, my bad. All right, so about 300 feet or whatnot. I mean, if you have a business that's 310 feet away, so that one's eligible. I mean, what's the difference? I mean, you should just eliminate the feet. It's dumb. Someone could be 280 feet or 299, and that just doesn't make sense at all to me. But maybe it does to you guys. Like I say, I think a lot of people are just misinformed on it, and there's just a lot of good, and like someone else mentioned earlier here today that these are taking out refinances. I mean, I can speak for myself. We took out a second, and remodeled the building and whatnot, only to find out 3 months later Measure O passed. And it's like, oh my goodness. I mean, this is our savings, and there's no criminal activity going on. You see the people. We turn away more people than we help because we're strictly medical card. That's it. We work with local doctors. They send us the patients. We don't do the recreation. Can we understand? I think you guys gave out a license. Not you guys, but to say they gave out a license to a strip club. I don't know if I read that right. I'm okay. And so I mean, you see, I mean, it just doesn't. I don't understand that. So that's it. I mean, people brought up a lot of stuff that we were going to say anyway, but I mean, there's just things that just don't make a lot of sense to myself. And I appreciate this. Thank you. Oh. All right, thank you.
Commissioner, I did want to just address the last part of the speaker's comment.
Okay.
Yes, 100 West Hospitality has applied for and received a permit. The city was required to issue it under the terms of Measure O. That specific property was identified, and city staff and the council had no discretion to deny it. So I agree, it's probably not the place I would have picked to issue a marijuana dispensary permit. But that was the law as it was written, and that I just want to make sure that was clear.
Thank you. Kim Smith.
Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you are about to give before this body will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Thank you.
I'm a small business person like this couple over here. And my business partner, he was going to try and be here, but he's not feeling well tonight. He was diagnosed with cancer, and my mom had just died of cancer. And I had used the medication that I got from my mom that she refused to take on our dog who got cancer, and I cured the dog's cancer. So I was shocked, and then I thought, my God, I wish I would have pushed my mom to take it, but what's done is done. I worked in health care for more than 20 years at the Veterans Hospital. I also taught for Victor Valley College health care for 10 years. And so I really got into researching it. And when my friend and business partner was diagnosed, I said, oh my gosh, I said, have you heard of what medical marijuana can do for you? And so we looked for the medications, and we couldn't find any place that had the medications. They had lots of marijuana products, but not the concentrated oils and the things that he needed to treat his cancer. And they had told him he needed to get his affairs in order. So I started making it for him, and he's been in remission ever since. My daughter, right after that, was diagnosed with cancer, and sadly, she died. She was pregnant, and she died. It was metastasized, and also she was a high school teacher, so she didn't. When I brought her the oils, she said, "Mom, I can't take that because I'll lose my job," and then she lost her life. But my business partner and I, we decided to form a business because we wanted to make the medications available along with the other stuff. And our goal was to have a place, because he and we'd smoked when we were young, but we hadn't done any. We both had federal jobs. We hadn't been involved in any kind of drugs. But when we saw what we could do with this, we thought we could make a place where people just like all of us in here would feel comfortable coming into. And that was our goal. one of the things, and I'm just giving this as a business partner to be friendly to business. I'm a small business person. Everything I'm hearing is making me very discouraged about San Bernardino. It's making me think, you know what, we need to go somewhere else because San Bernardino is going to mess with us and mess with us and regulate us and make it impossible to keep a business going. The other thing that I want to address is from a healthcare perspective, in that people having to register that they're going to grow some marijuana in their house. For one thing, I don't want to put it out that I have beer in my fridge. That's, you know, if I like beer to relax, or if I like to weed to relax, I don't want to put it on someplace where people can look that up public and see what I do in my personal life. Well, now, as a medical professional, I could not stand on the elevator with another healthcare professional and see a patient there and say, hey, how's your diabetes doing? How much insulin are you using? That's a HIPAA violation. No. It is, you can't talk about anybody's anxiety, their depression, their cancer, their blood pressure pills. You can't talk about this. You cannot make this public. And I would see a lot of, you know, I'm very discouraged about San Bernardino, but you really need to get rid of that, making people register, because that's their health information, and that's a HIPAA violation. And somebody will take you to court on that. And besides the people just not doing it. I mean, I just wouldn't do it. And then I would fight it if somebody said something. And so that really is everybody else has explained things very well. I've been very supportive of what everybody has said. And I thank you for listening. And I hope everything proceeds quickly and smoothly. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Just a follow-up comment. So I'm not a medical doctor. I don't have any opinion on the medical value of marijuana. But I did want to point out that, you know, cannabis is still a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act. It's a Schedule I drug because the federal government, which regulates medications in this country, has found that it has a high potential for abuse and has no accepted medical value in treatment. Now, I know a lot of people disagree with that. The state of California disagrees with that. But when we're talking about something like HIPAA, two things: the city is not a health care provider, so we're not under HIPAA. And the other issue is that it is a federal law, and the use of cannabis is not seen under federal law to have medical value. That being said, I understand there are legitimate privacy concerns that have been expressed here, and you're certainly welcome to discuss and consider those. But I did want to address the statement that, you know, having permits would somehow be a violation of federal law. It is not.
Thank you. Carmel, you have one item that's not on the agenda. Would you like to present that now or after the recess?
I can present it now.
Thank you.
You know, I have this problem, and I've been looking at it during the council meetings, and I've been driving around the city and I've been noticing it. We are building a lot of warehouses like on Waterman, and it really upsets me if we're going to build a warehouse on the golf course, and I believe all these things probably come through planning first, but we have an 80% rental population in this city. I mean, on a golf course, we could put housing, you know, so that we could bring home ownership over here. So as I see all these warehouses erected, especially like on Waterman, I have a real big problem with that because we are not, there's a lot of empty buildings, there's a lot of vacant, there's a lot of available. I mean, I drive through here, I've been a real estate professional for 23 years. And it really, I don't really see the benefit of it to us. I mean, building warehouses, improving the vacant land, we are not going to get any property tax dollars because we gave our property tax dollars away in the annexation of the fire department. But if we were bringing in home ownership, we would be able to, you know, mitigate that 80% factor, which actually, you know, makes us have to use our police more, makes us, you know, makes us not have as much clout, I guess. We're not evenly proportioned here, so When you guys get before you the building of warehouses, especially on golf courses or 100,000 square foot warehouses, I would just maybe urge you guys before you went ahead and passed these things, for you just to go through the city and maybe see where they are, because I don't think any warehouses, you should actually stop at Foisey and go over, towards Tippecanoe and over back this way. I don't think that warehouses should be on Waterman. I don't think that's an effective use of Waterman. I don't think it's an effective use of the golf course. I don't think anybody actually thought about when you have big trucks coming out on Waterman and the backup on Waterman, and maybe the effect that it might have on the businesses. So I know this had nothing to do with cannabis, but I am in front of the Planning Commission, and I do think that you guys hear these things and that you see these things. And as we can see with this marijuana ordinance, I don't necessarily believe, one, that the council reads everything, or two, that they're always fully informed. And so I know that you guys are, and I know that you guys study these things. And I would just please ask that when it comes to the building of warehouses and making our city just a warehouse city, that you would just please look at where are we going to put residential use, how are we going to create home ownership, how are we going to, if all those warehouses were filled, where are all those people going to live? They're not going to be able to live in San Bernardino. They're going to be taking their money outside of the city. And I think that we're just killing ourselves very slowly, one step at a time. So if you guys could just remember that the next time you're looking at warehouses, or just when you're out driving in the city, just look at the available and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to call a 5-minute recess, and if anyone else would like to speak, fill out a speaker slip and give it to our secretary. So we'll be back here at 9 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting back to order. And I would like to call on Barbara Babcock.
Good evening, Barbara Babcock, 1234 East 26th Street. I almost didn't come up tonight because I'm hurting so bad. 2 years ago, I had my first cannabis for a broken back, and it really changed my life. I was absolutely against it, but it made such a difference. For the first time, I wasn't throbbing and aching all the time. I hope that whatever we do, we simplify it, make it easy. Let's get this passed. These people were right. We need to be much more business-friendly in the city. And I just got an email from a friend who's in her 60s and has an international business. She lives in San Bernardino, and I can't find it on my phone right now, but she said, I go to Vegas a lot on business, and when I'm there, there's all these elderly seniors from San Bernardino and other places going to Vegas because it's regulated, it's easy to handle, and they have some clean facilities. So let's do the right thing for our people. Let's do the right thing for our citizens. We want to attract businesses. We don't want to shy them, have them go away. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If there are no other speakers, I will call the public hearing to an end, and we'll go on with the rest of our business. So the public hearing is now closed. Any other public comments not on the agenda? Hearing none, I'll ask for Planning Commission reports or announcements.
Excuse me, Chair, if I may, going back to item 2, the City Council is looking for a final recommendation from the Planning Commission. There are, I misspoke earlier, I said there was just one resolution. There's actually 3 different resolutions related to the 3 different ordinances.
Yeah.
So if the Commission wanted to, it's probably best to vote on them separately. And then if you have opinions about the buffer for residential, well, if you have opinions on anything, all 3 ordinances are before you in your entirety. The specific areas where the council wanted input from the Commission were the residential buffers and then the permits for personal cultivation.
Yeah, I got ahead of myself there. So, do we have any comments on Development Code Amendment number 1802A, 1802B, or 1803C?
Yeah, I'll start.
Do we have a comment?
This is more for the people in the audience. Just like to thank them for coming and staying so late, and to continue your diligence. If you don't know your council person and you don't know when the public hearing is, I would find out very fast and speak to them a one-on-one basis. That would be my first recommendation to all of you. There have been some very valid points. I thank everybody for their input. That's why this is a public hearing. That's why we live in the United States of America, so we can come out and do that. And there's been quite a few good ones, and I hope that you continue your diligence. This is a very, very deep subject with a lot of things that can or may not be able to be resolved. But the point is that you're here, and we do appreciate it, especially at this hour. Secondly, myself, I would like to see the buffer zone extended to 600 feet mostly because where I live, and this type of business is not good around schools or parks or any of those places. I'm not saying that it is not a good business or that I'm not a non-pro business person. Those are issues that need to be worked out. It's here. I believe that the biggest problem is the federal government and their regulations, and until that's resolved with them, I have friends of mine that have suffered from cancer, that have used the marijuana or cannabis and felt much better. So it definitely has a very good reputation for medically being a proven problem for pain and ailments. But until they solve that problem, we're going to continue to knock heads with everybody. However, as far as the city goes, it isn't the legitimate business owners that are the foes here, are the people that are the bad guys. It's the previous business owners that have messed it up for everybody else. That's why there are these regulations. That's why we need regulations, in my opinion, okay, in the city, so that when problems arise, we have something to back us up. And before that, we didn't. We had bad people owning bad businesses, doing bad things, particularly around residential areas, okay? And that's why we have to have these things. It's not perfect, but if there were no bad people and no bad business owners previously or today, we wouldn't need all of this, you know? We wouldn't all be sitting here. But we do, unfortunately. And but the biggest one on my mind is to extend it to 600 feet because there are so many, particularly in the south end, the non-residential use business or whatever you would describe them. You know what I'm saying, is residents that are in non-compliance.
Residential houses
Okay.
that are in industrial
And,
zones, yes.
I've gone through this personally before, and I would like to see this is just my self-opinion here, I would like to see that extended to 600 feet. I don't think it's going to affect the businesses themselves in any way. They're still going to be here. People are still going to go to them, no matter what. The other recommendation I have is if you're going to have your own personal marijuana to grow, you don't need a permit. You shouldn't need a personal permit. You don't need your name out there for public record, anything. Those would be my recommendations to the City Council. Is that it?
Yes, Mr. Durr.
I piggyback on the Vice Chairman. Kind of took my words. I agree with that. I think the 600-foot buffer should be applied to residential and non-conforming residential as well. And it's a complicated thing, and everybody's already really gone over that well. But I think medical use is, in my opinion, is a good thing. I've had experience with family with that as well. But I think the recreational use, from my experience at work, is not a good thing with some of the people it draws. So I think the buffer zone needs to be in place. And I also think that a private citizen should be able to do whatever they want and not have to permit it or have any kind of, unless what they're doing is affecting their neighbor, then code enforcement or police could step in. But otherwise, I agree.
To the chair. I believe 600-foot buffer zone is a little excessive. In our committee, we talked about 300 feet. I'm not exactly sure what the state's looking at, but I think 600 feet may work okay, but I think you need to take into consideration if you're up against a flood control or a freeway barrier or something like that, that plays into it to where, you might have 3/4 of it going 600 feet one way, but you have some sort of barrier in there. So if it could help a business survive or put together, I think that would be a good thing. I'm not in favor of all the strict licensing and the review of your employees. I think that's a little extensive. I know that, again, as I mentioned, being an employer, I could never get away with that with my employees. It's hard enough. It's hard to be an employer in today's world, and to be that strict and have the city have so much control to where you can take a license out, and 12 months later you're not sure whether or not you're going to be able to renew your license. It's too much of an investment to bring a business to this community with that kind of threat. So that's another area I'd have a problem with. And I'm very much in favor of people being able to grow personally on their property. I don't think they should have to register with the city. I don't think they should have to take out a license, and I certainly don't think their name should be on a list of personal growers, and so that somebody can access it or access their property. So, yeah, I'm in favor of no license whatsoever for personal growth.
I agree with the commissioner as well. I think that the licensing system that's being proposed is infringing upon our citizens' privacy and the quiet entitlement that they're enjoyed upon inhabiting a private property within our city limits. Also, I think that we need to take a look at the sensitive use buffer as well. I think 600 feet is very extensive, and I think that if we're trying to encourage business and become a business business-friendly city, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a responsible way, but also that we're able to accommodate the potential businesses that we would like to create within the city. 600 just seems very extensive. By strengthening these regulations, we're sort of in my opinion, I feel like we're isolating certain residents within the city of San Bernardino, just as we have certain speakers here that live within the city of San Bernardino. They would like to get started and commence business within the city or work with the city or find out what exactly needs to be done so that they can meet those requirements. But the regulations are just so far-fetched and complex and just so out of reach. All you see is these out-of-town speakers, people representing people from other cities that have the means and the ways that can come in and really just go in and do what needs to be done. So I think that we need to make sure that we're acting responsibly with this ordinance and that it equally represents and protects our residents and our business owners as well, because what's being put forth before us right now, in my opinion, does a disservice to the residents and the business owners and the business climate within the city of San Bernardino collectively, and I think that that's something that we need to address. I think it would be better for us to actually respond to our constituencies' needs and requests so that we can move forward on one accord and we're not back and forth in court like some of our speakers were referencing to earlier because of certain technicalities and inconsistencies that won't fly with the general plan or just certain topics that the residents will reject. So I think that this needs a lot of work. It's negatively impacting, like I said, our residents, our business owners, and it's also it's putting out that perception that our business climate isn't necessarily willing to work with the market demands and the changing mechanisms that are coming along with implementing this new type of business. So I think that's something we need to be mindful for moving forward, and I understand that we're on a very strict time scale and the council has instructed staff to move forward expeditiously, but I think it would be in our best interest to make sure that we're doing this the right way so that we're avoiding other potential legal costs and political uproars moving forward. So, thank you.
Thank you. So I was just going to say, yes, the proposed ordinance here, it's it's a real big hammer. You're looking at the distant locational criteria requirements, and then as well as these permitting process, and of course with the limitations in terms of the licensing, 12 months. That's for the amount of investment they're going through. That seems very unrewarding in terms of your returns. How are you going to spread your costs out for the 12 months and then coming back and renewing your licensing? So if we're pushing in terms of setting distance criteria, I think there needs to be relaxations in other areas so that we have, that we're considering these common sense, these common expressed tonight in terms of police regulations, merit points. Those things needs to be reevaluated, and I don't suppose that we could continue this to re-examine this a little bit further, Mr. Graham or Mr. Persico.
So I will say that the City Council has already noticed the public hearing for consideration of your input, whatever that input is. So their expectation was that the Planning Commission would be sending them recommendations after this meeting.
I'm in favor of the 600 feet increase, but relax, no permitting in terms of registrations and all these other merit points. And if we do, we need to increase that from 12 months to maybe 36 months in terms of licensing. Thank you.
Well, all of my colleagues have said good things. I am also in favor of the 600 feet because being up here, we also have to take into consideration residents and families and other people, not just vendors and being business friendly. We have to kind of find a medium, a fairness. And I think we have in some respect because most of you have spoken against, most of us have spoken against the excessive licensing and extending the permit, the time frame, and so forth. But the 600 feet, I think, is important for residents. Some people have said that, if we go that route, there's going to be an underground. We have had no regulation for some time, and we still have underground. We have many illegal operators in the city. And so I don't know if that's true. Only time will tell. But I think the 600 feet is a good thing for residents. I think businesses can still thrive. We can probably look or recommend to the City Council to make some changes in terms of the permitting, because I don't believe that people who use it should register that they're using, and none of those things. It's just too restrictive. But it is, for me, an issue of what is fair to the community, so business owners as well as residents. I think businesses, even with the regulations, because, like I said, we have not had regulations, and we do have an active underground operators. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. Anyone else?
One more point.
Okay.
If I could make one more point. I have talked to the Orange Show on a couple of occasions with respect to the events they have there. And if you haven't talked to them and you're not aware of the impact that they have on our community financially, they bring a lot of money into the community. Any kind of events they have, they do financial analysis of them. And just one that I got some paperwork on, they brought $13 million into the community in one weekend. And they broke it down to where it went for the accommodations, the food and beverage, entertainment, and so on. So they do a detailed analysis on each one of these events, and you'd be quite surprised at the amount of money that comes into our community. So I think they're real friendly. I think we want to encourage the events that they have, and I think we want to support the Orange Show and work hard to keep them as a good partner.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Graham.
So the ordinance you have on personal cultivation of cannabis in private residences currently doesn't have a permitting requirement in it. That was just a question that came from the council whether you think it should or shouldn't. So if you have a consensus on this one that a permit or registration is not desirable, I think you could approve it as is and make the findings that you have in the resolution. I didn't hear much discussion on smoking in public places. The ordinance generally follows ordinances on tobacco smoking, and the findings are essentially the same. There's some additional restrictions. For example, you can smoke tobacco on city property in designated areas. There are no designated areas for cannabis smoking on city property, but that's the only real fundamental difference that I can see. It did sound like the Planning Commission had some consensus going on changing the residential buffer to 600 feet. So I would recommend that if and when you do make a motion on that particular resolution, that include, if that's the consensus, that include changing that buffer to 600 feet. It sounds like the consensus is also that buffer should include for residential uses, not just residential zones. I know that some idea has been proposed about the consideration of intervening structures and barriers. That's not actually an unusual circumstance. We do actually have a similar consideration on the freeway electronic billboards. It is not, the distance between them is not as the crow flies only if it's on the other side of the freeway, because the thought was that there's a big separation there. So if that was sort of the consensus, was 600 feet, but an intervening such as a railroad, a freeway, or a flood control channel, those are the three I heard, would break that distance, you could include that in your motion when you're recommending approving the resolution.
I would like to thank everyone who spoke tonight. I really appreciated your input, and I didn't hear a thing that I disagreed with. I think you're all on the right track. I wish we had more time. My recommendation, if we had more time, would be to throw the whole thing out and start over. But we can't do that. We have to submit this to the City Council, and they will make their determination. They're constrained by the voting laws. They have to get it on the ballot for November. I'm hoping that everyone who spoke here tonight will go to the City Council and express your views there and do what you can to get the changes made that you would like to see. There isn't much that we can do tonight. We can't change anything tonight except maybe agree on a buffer distance, which I care not about. And the other is the permitting, which I agree that we should not do. Beyond that, we really can't change anything tonight.
Well, I think I misspoke earlier on. The council had 2 direct questions for the commission to address, but the entire ordinances, all 3 of them, are before you. So I think, Chair, or any other commissioner, you could go in and make a suggestion if there's consensus and then get a majority opinion to change a standard. That can certainly be forwarded to the City Council.
Well, there's a lot I would change, but where do you start is the problem. There's so much in there that I feel that needs to be changed that, again, I would say start over, but we don't have the time. So we will have to pass it on to the City Council essentially the way it is, and hope that they come up with a reasonable solution. And that's all I have to say.
Why don't we have the time to further look into it?
Pardon me?
Wouldn't we have the time to further look into it? Is it the city's position that we would rather rush into this ordinance and implement it onto the books than rather take our time and make sure that we're doing things correctly and to the will of the constituency? Is that the position that we're trying to take today?
No. The problem is the voting laws. We have to get it on the ballot at a certain time. Like, I think March 31st is the deadline. I'm not sure what the deadline is, but it's getting it on the November ballot that is the issue.
Does it have to be on the November ballot? If worse comes to worse, will we be able to hold a special election for that? Or would the council be able to do that?
Too many mics. The direction from the City Council mostly arose out of community meetings they've had. So you've had one meeting tonight. They've had several. They also, the CAC also got a little bit on the commercial cannabis activity side. And the general community feeling was that they wanted this done. They wanted it done quickly. And so that's where the direction from the council's coming. Like I said, they've anticipated that you will be able to give them feedback in the one meeting. They gave you direct questions because they understand it's a very big ordinance. Like I said, they've already had one meeting on it. They're going to have 2 more. They felt that your expertise was especially crucial on those 2 issues. But the whole ordinance is up for grabs if you want to make recommendations on it. I understand it's a daunting task. It was a daunting task to write. It was a daunting task to review. They are expecting something back in time for them to consider it on next Wednesday.
I think that Stephen summarized very well what it is that we were being asked, and based on everybody's comments of what the consensus is, of the things that the City Council is asking us. One is we were in a consensus, or at least a majority, that we were in favor of the 600-foot buffer, but that we could include for them to consider changing as an amendment the things of natural barriers. And I think most of us would be in agreement with that. And that's what you needed, a motion for us to vote. Is that correct? And then the second one was the thing about smoking in public places, which is pretty much modeled according to the tobacco And I think most of us would be in consensus with that. And then the third one had to do with permits, I guess. And that, I think the consensus was that the permitting and the licensing was a little too restrictive, and that we wanted them to consider not 12, but maybe, I heard one who actually gave a number, which was Commissioner Aaron, 36 months and so forth and so forth. That's my understanding, that you want us to address and make those recommendations in a motion or otherwise, and put it on the record to go back to City Council.
That's correct. And I could perhaps suggest an addition. I mean, I've heard a lot of discussion here. Instead of perhaps going through and redlining it for the City Council, because I agree, if we want to get out of here today, that's not probably feasible. But you could, in addition to the 600-foot buffer, you could also give them that it's the general consensus of the Planning Commission that perhaps it's too restrictive overall, and that you recommend that they consider loosening some of the restrictions, considering that you've increased the residential buffer zones. That would be a general piece of feedback for them to consider that wouldn't necessitate you going through and redlining it. Again, that's just a suggestion.
So do you want to walk us through, either Mark or Stephen, on these motions? Because I see here before me a lot of, number 2018-014, and I'm confused about which is which. But so how do we address this as a motion so our commissioners can make the motion?
Sure, I will.
And I'll be willing to second it.
I will attempt to walk the commissioners through this. So on page 3 of your agenda, it has a rather lengthy recommendation. I think whoever wants to make the motion could read the first part, assuming that you concur with the CEQA finding for all 3 of these. And then when you got to number 2 on the recommendation, you could, as has been suggested, say that with respect to 1802A, the buffer should be increased to 600 feet, with physical barriers being taken into consideration. 1802B doesn't sound like there's any change. And 1802C currently is written without a permit requirement, so you could approve it as is. You don't need to. When the council gets it back, they will know. And I am preparing. I already started the basic format of the council staff report, but I'll finish it up tomorrow. And then, as Stephen has suggested, I think you could make. The maker of the motion could say, as a general consensus, the commission believes that it should be, that it's too restrictive, and with specific attention paid to the 1-year limit for operator permits and the 1-year limit for employee permits should be re-examined. Not to put words in anybody's mouth, but that's kind of a way. That's kind of a way to get through this.
On the personal cultivation, I know that's not a permit, but it asks for registration or something like that?
No, the ordinance is written without either one of those.
Oh.
What the council asked the commission to look at was, should that be done? So again, I think the maker of the motion, when they got to 1802C, could just recommend approval as is. Because as it was sent to you, as it is in your packet this evening, there is no permit required, no registration required.
And the staff report would reflect the fact that you had a very healthy and robust discussion about whether a permit or registration was necessary, and you felt that as is, it was fine.
Even though the public hearing has been closed, we have a question from the audience that I would like to entertain. Carmel?
I think if you're going to do that, Chair, you need to vote. You need to have. Yes, you need to take a vote to reopen the hearing.
I would like to make a motion to reopen the hearing.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Sounds to me like it passed. What do you think?
I think it did.
I believe the vote was 4-2.
All right. Carmel?
The question I have is, does this body have, are they able to recommend approval of 1802B and 1802C as written, but do they have the authority to just not recommend approval at all in its entirety with what the chair said, to go back to the drawing board for 1802A? Do they have, can they make that motion?
Yes. You are making a recommendation to the City Council, your thoughts on that ordinance. If you feel that they should not pass the ordinance, that can be your recommendation. They'll receive it and consider it and then have their own discussions.
That would be my recommendation.
That would be mine too.
And I would second that.
Was there anything in particular that you wanted to highlight from Section 1802A that would not be in the city's best interest in implementing with this ordinance?
Well, there was a few things. It was the employees, you know, the background of the employees. It was the you see this when we had the city meeting the other day, you know, they actually had told them, hey, they might not want to use the 600 feet buffer because then it might actually create a monopoly. I think that if you are going to create the 600 feet buffer, then you should not put it where there is non-conforming uses. So if you have a non-conforming use, there should be no buffer. I think that would be fair. That would keep it out of the residential neighborhoods, but would also give the commercial, you know, area or corridors, would actually allow them to actually thrive a little or to actually have, you know, free enterprise. I also think it's the ordinance is very restrictive as written, and there are a lot of redundants in it that if we just specifically accepted state law, we would be better off and we would probably save ourselves, you know, headaches and lawsuits and this and that. As I said earlier, I don't really think that they could actually adopt this. I just think there's too many holes in it, and I think that if you guys actually recommend approval of this, I think you guys are in the prime position here to stop the city from making this mistake twice. So I would ask that you would just recommend no approval and send the city back with, you know, less restrictive guidelines, but that would do, you know, what's right for the people and the community and the businesses, because in this restrictiveness, we are not actually keeping true to our general plan. So since it has been said that you do have that power to send it back to them, you know, I've been at all the community meetings. I know it's not that we're in a hurry. We just think the city is playing games, but we would rather have something that we can all agree as a community to actually live with than something we all hate that's going to cause litigation, that's going to, you know, take time and money and this and that away from other things like streetlights and potholes and prostitution and panhandling and all these various things that we can, you know, that we complain about. I think mostly people just were under the impression that this is going to be a dog and pony show because it's election and nobody actually wants to put this forward. But this is actually something that I don't believe they're sending to the public to vote. This is something that they are just going to pass on their own. And like I stated earlier, I believe that they lost that right when they lost on Measure P. So I think that we have a problem. I think that you guys, the chair said it perfectly, send them back to the drawing board. And I would accept that recommendation, second it, third it, fourth it, and take it all the way down so that we can continue this discussion with your input as the Planning Commission. So that was my question, and it got answered. If anybody has anything for me, then I'll answer it.
I guess not. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the public hearing is now closed.
If I could share just real quickly before you take a vote, I think all three of these should be voted on separately. And as Stephen has said, absolutely, the commission has a right to have no recommendation on 1802A. I think giving the council concrete feedback on the ordinance before you would be most helpful to the City Council. Having no recommendation from the Planning Commission could leave or does leave the Commission out of the discussion. The hearing has been noticed for the 21st. It is possible that the city council would continue that and wait for the planning commission's input. I can't predict or say what they're going to do, but I think having a recommendation from this body on the commercial cannabis activities would be most helpful to the council and would allow you to actually have a statement on the record. No recommendation is no recommendation. You can certainly take that. That is certainly your prerogative.
So I guess we will start with 1802A. Does anybody have a motion they would like to present?
I would like to make a motion to reject resolution 1802A.
The motion has been made to reject 1802A. We do not have a second yet.
I will make a second.
We have a motion and a second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
The noes have it. Motion is denied. All right, so
I'll make a motion for Amendment 1802-A, that we adopt that resolution with the recommendation of changing the buffer zone from 300 to 600 feet.
Do you want to include in that the
Yes.
intervening structures?
Yes.
Do you want to include just an additional general statement that it was the consensus of the Planning Commission that the council should spend more time looking at the regulations
Absolutely.
because they seemed a bit excessive?
Yes.
Okay.
good. Yeah. So did you complete your motion?
Mm-hmm.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. To approve.
Clarification, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Clarification, Mr. Graham. So in terms of the excessive, would that include would that include the modifications to the time frame for licensing, et cetera?
Sure. My recommendation would be if you want to give specific examples, to please do. So if, that there's a general consensus that the regulations are perhaps excessive, and specific examples the Planning Commission cited, included the short length of time on the regulatory permit. I don't know if there was any consensus on the work permits generally, but whether, those should even be issued or necessary, or at least the time frame on them. If you can give them 2 examples like that, they would probably appreciate it.
Yes, so I would like to add that to the motion, expand the excessive categories to include the short time frame that it's prescribing as proposed.
Okay.
And then the work permitting process, and then extend that to maybe 36 months.
Okay. And I'm taking this essentially as a substitute motion, unless you're willing to accept it. Okay. Were there any other excessive regulations? Sorry.
I thought what Commissioner Aaron said was more appropriate for DCA 18-02C, not? Or
No. It falls under it.
Okay. All right then.
I think we have a motion then, in a second, Chair. The motion, I believe, was to adopt the resolution along with the findings of fact and the environmental determinations related to Development Code Amendment 1802A, which relates to commercial cannabis activities, with a statement from the Planning Commission that the residential buffer zones should be increased to 600 feet, not to include natural barriers such as railroads, freeways, and flood control channels, and also that the Planning Commission felt that the regulations contained within the ordinance need to be reconsidered by the City Council as perhaps being excessive, with specific attention paid to the length of the permits, the need and length of the work permits.
Does the maker of the motion agree with that?
Yes.
Does the second agree with that?
Yes.
I will call for the question then. Those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say no. Motion carries.
Was that a 6-0 vote, just for the record?
Yes. 7.
7, sorry. I can't count.
So, on the question of 1802B, do we have a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to keep it as proposed, in accordance with, I believe this is consistent with the state regs and rules. Am I correct, Mr. Graham?
You are. State law under Prop 64 generally prohibits smoking in public places. This essentially fills in the blanks on what the city considers those public places to be.
And clarification to that is that they won't be, you can't smoke on, is it city grounds or is it governmental grounds?
It's specifically on city property and in city vehicles. Other government entities, as property owners, would be free to restrict cannabis use on their own properties as they see fit.
Thank you. So that would be my motion.
Second.
Second? Oh, okay.
We have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 1802A as it's B, as it stands. Is that correct? Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The question of Amendment 1802C. Do we have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion adopting Amendment 1802C.
The second.
Any discussion?
And I would recommend including with that recommendation simply a statement from the Planning Commission that you did consider the question of whether registration or permits were advisable for these, and you rejected that idea.
Right, and that was for the personal use, right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. I'd like to make a motion adopting Amendment 1802C, also including the recommendations and the opposition noted in regards to the permitting system for personal cultivation.
That includes any registration at all.
Correct. That is correct.
Oh,
Second.
clarification. It seems to me that the proposed motion, it's going with the proposed ordinance, but I hear some inconsistency in terms of opposition to the regulations requirements. That's a modification to as proposed. Am I not correct?
No. So the ordinance as it's written and as it was submitted to the City Council at their last meeting did not have a permit or a registration requirement within it. During their discussion, the City Council had some concerns about health and safety, and they wanted to know, specifically the Planning Commission, because you have a lot of familiarity with codes and permitting requirements, they wanted to know if the Planning Commission felt it was advisable to include a registration or permitting requirement there. So the ordinance you have in front of you doesn't include that, but I felt it would be helpful for the council to get explicit feedback. You know, you approved the ordinance as is, and in doing so, you had considered whether to add permitting, and you did not think that that was advisable.
Got it. Thank you.
So the record will reflect our opposition to that and not necessarily just provide a recommendation saying this isn't something that we would like to be included in the final ordinance, right? Is that the general takeaway that we're getting from here? So if they were to just completely omit our recommendations, would they still implement this licensing system the way it's sort of like being proposed before? Because we've submitted recommendations to the council before. I believe they just did an appeal at the last council meeting, the one before last, with the veteran project, I believe, and they went against our recommendations. And
Well, that appeal is actually still pending.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they have not made a final decision on that appeal.
Definitely.
But I would say that, you know, for everything except for development code amendments and general plan amendments, the decisions of the Planning Commission are final. They are appealable to the City Council, such as in the case of that conditional use permit. In the case of development code amendments and general plan amendments, the city council is the only body capable of passing ordinances for the city. And that's what a development code amendment is. They take recommendations and feedback from the planning commission because you have knowledge in this area and you have more time to spend on it in certain respects. But ultimately, it is a recommendation only. They are free to take your recommendation and then make the choice that they feel best protects the health, safety, and welfare of the city.
Thank you.
Where are we?
You have a motion and a second, I believe.
Correct.
Any more discussion? Pardon me?
You have a motion by Commissioner Jones with a second by Commissioner Gerber.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussion? I will call for the question. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The motion carries. And I think that we now come to items, public comments, items not on the agenda, which I took up previously, but I'll reopen it for any public comments that anyone would like to make for items not on the agenda. Apparently we have none. I'll call for Planning Commission reports and announcements.
I got one. Let me help me with this, would you? The Neighborhood Association Council is going to be planting trees through a project with West Coast, not West Coast Arborists, West Coast Incorporated.
Well, I think it's West Coast Arborists Incorporated and the city of San Bernardino.
It's a project that the Neighborhood Association is doing in conjunction with the city. You can get a tree planted on city property outside your residence or anywhere on city property if you so desire, as long as you agree to water it. And I think we said, what was it, 60 cents a year is what the cost would be?
Something like that,
on
really
your water
low.
bill.
Really low.
And we're looking for eligible places and people that are willing to take care of a newly planted tree throughout the city.
Well, actually, we're focused on, out of the neighborhood associations that are participating, we have 6. And so those are the focus boundary areas because there are a lot of vacancies there. But during the months of February and March, we are knocking on doors, talking to residents, securing watering agreements, and then we'll be working with the Public Works, who is actually going to do the planting.
Absolutely, and we're going to be given about 25 trees
It's
per
30 trees
association,
per
30 trees.
area, but it's a total of 145 trees.
So we have 145 trees, and
To beautify
we
the
need
city.
places to plant them. So if you want to spend 60 cents a year to help a tree grow, let us know.
I have a comment that I want to make. Before this meeting, I met with the Historic Preservation Committee, or a couple of members, at the Andreessen Building. I thought we were going to get a tour of the building, but it turned out that we had a discussion on how to prevent crime and stuff downtown. But out of that meeting came the suggestion that we organize a set of tours of our historic buildings here in downtown and sort of do an inventory of what we have. And I'm very much interested in that, and I'll be working with the committee. I was sorry that the Historic Preservation Committee wasn't combined with the Planning Commission, because I thought it would have been a very good fit. And instead they're with the, I guess, with the Fine Arts Commission. So we'll just have to work around that. But I do want to work with the Historic Preservation Committee in getting an inventory of our downtown historic buildings. and to arrange tours so that people know they're there.
Yeah, what's happening with the merger of commissions? This is something that the council has discussed on a couple of occasions. At the last city council meeting, the vote from the council, mayor and council, was to merge the Fine Arts Commission and Historic Preservation Commission into a Cultural Affairs Commission. My understanding is that staff met with the Fine Arts Commission earlier today, and they came up with an idea, arts and cultural. They've got a slightly different name. The council will be considering this, I believe, at their first meeting in March. I don't think it'll happen next week. So with the new commission structure and new bylaws and new ordinances, council members will then have to appoint members to those new commissions. Because if they were appointed to the Fine Arts Commission or Historic Preservation Commission, those commissions would cease to exist. So this is a long way of saying I think it's probably still another 45 days or so before appointments are finally made to the new restructured commissions. And at that point, we can certainly sit down and start talking to them. I do know that the Historical Society has very good records and does a lot of that information. The Historic Preservation Commission, which Community Development also staffs, for a short period of time, this was actually just prior to my arrival, was doing tours. There seems to be a lack of interest on the part of some of the Historic Preservation Commission members, because they have to be agendized. If you're going to have a majority of the commission there, it's not an easy task. It has to be agendized. You have to let the public know where you're going to be, approximately when you're going to be there. So it's a good idea, but a lot of work to put together. But we can certainly look at that when the new restructured commission has commission members appointed.
Any other reports or announcements from the commission? I'll call for the director's report.
Yes, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I have two items. One is the major projects list, and the second is the city has its third annual Arts Fest coming up on March 24th. We've had, as the name implies, third annual. We've done two of these in the past. This is going to be at San Manuel Stadium on Saturday, March 24th from noon to 9 p.m. We do have a Facebook page, and we are very, you all are leaders within your neighborhood and within the community, and I think what's going to get the best turnout for this event is your neighbors hearing from you directly. We will have approximately 100 artists in all mediums. There will be live music, largely provided by Richardson Prep Band, which if you have heard them, they're spectacular. If you haven't heard them, you're really missing something. I mean, this is like no middle school band you have ever heard. And there will be food trucks there as well. And Garner Holt has agreed to bring one of his large raptors, animatronic raptors, will be out in front of the stadium with 3 smaller pieces. So it's going to be a great community, family-friendly event. So please, we are anticipating between 3,000 and 6,000 attendees that day. So please share this good news with your family and friends, and we're looking forward to seeing all of you out there on the 24th, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I would like to make a motion to adjourn into
To February 20th.
to February 20th, 2018.
Yes, thank you.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The motion carries.
Thank you.